Hello story enthusiasts. Welcome to Harryverse X. Today we venture into, what if Amaterasu and Susanoo found Harry in cupboard and Japanese gods made him god of sun and storm. Your support means everything, like and subscribe. Enjoy. Chapter 1, The Cupboard and the Sky. The storm came from nowhere. One moment the sky above Privet Drive was the flat, indifferent black of an English autumn night, and the next it was alive, a deep, churning violet green that had no business existing over Surrey. Thunder rolled in from the west like something enormous was turning over in its sleep. The street lamps flickered. Mrs. Figg's cat bolted under a hedge and refused to come out for 3 days. 2 houses down, Vernon Dursley shifted in his sleep, convinced on some animal level that the world had changed shape while he wasn't paying attention, and then convinced himself it was gas. He was half right. The change came to number 4 Privet Drive at precisely 2 in the morning, and it did not knock. The door did not open. The locks did not turn. One moment the hallway was empty, and the next it wasn't, filled instead with a light so warm and total that it seemed to come from everywhere at once, not casting shadows so much as simply dissolving them. The light had a quality to it that was hard to name. It wasn't the sharp white of electricity or the yellow of firelight. It was the precise, irreplaceable gold of sunrise, the first 10 seconds of a morning in late spring, when the world seems briefly convinced that everything might be all right. A woman stood in the hallway. She was tall, and she wore robes the color of molten copper that shifted as she moved, catching light that wasn't coming from anywhere in particular. Her hair was extraordinary, black at the roots, and then, as it fell past her shoulders, it became something else entirely, deepening to a dark auburn, then to the warm orange of embers, then to the brilliant gold white of the sun's corona at its edge. It moved slightly, even in still air, as if it had its own gravity. Her eyes were the precise amber of sunlight through a glass of honey, and they were scanning the hallway with an expression that was still and measuring and very, very old. She did not look old. She looked perhaps 35 if you were looking at her face alone. But something in the way she stood, the absolute, unself-conscious stillness of someone who has never once in their existence been required to make themselves small, told you immediately that the number 35 was not a number that had any relevance to her whatsoever. She was looking at the cupboard under the stairs. The second presence arrived differently. There was no light. There was, instead, a pressure, the kind you feel in your ears before a thunderstorm breaks, a tightening of the air that made the whole house feel briefly like the inside of a held breath. The temperature dropped 4 degrees in 2 seconds. Then lightning, silent and interior, lit the hallway from somewhere that wasn't the windows, and he was there. He was broader than the woman, and taller by a head. He wore deep blue-black, and his dark hair was tied back loosely in a way that suggested it had started the day in a neater arrangement and had lost patience with that somewhere around the 1st century AD. He carried himself the way weather carries itself, not threatening, exactly, but deeply, fundamentally indifferent to whether you found it convenient or not. His eyes were the gray-green of deep ocean water in a storm, and they were bright with an energy that was, unmistakably, the specific electricity of a person who is currently furious on someone else's behalf. He was staring at the cupboard too. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The house sat around them, oblivious and sleeping, full of the small domestic sounds of people who had not the faintest idea what was standing in their hallway. "I felt it from the eastern sea," Amaterasu said. Her voice was quiet and measured, and each word landed with the absolute clarity of a bell. "The scar on his soul. Something died inside him tonight and left a mark on the fabric between worlds." "I felt it from the bottom of the Pacific," Susanoo said. His voice was lower, and it had a rougher quality, the kind of voice that has shouted into gales and isn't particularly bothered about indoor volume. "I thought it was an earthquake." "It wasn't." He paused. "Someone put a child in a cupboard." "Yes." "A baby." "Yes, Susanoo. In a cupboard." "I am aware of what a cupboard is." He turned his head to look at her. Something passed between them, not entirely reconciled, these two, never entirely reconciled, bound by blood and history and the kind of complicated love that has been accumulating interest for 10,000 years, but whatever else existed between them, this was not a moment where any of that mattered. What mattered was the cupboard. Amaterasu crossed the hallway in 3 steps and opened the door. The space inside was small and smelled of dust and old shoes and the particular staleness of air that has been sitting still for too long. A thin blanket. A camping cot that was slightly too small for the space it occupied. A sleeping baby, perhaps 15 months old, round-cheeked, dark-haired, bundled in a sleep suit covered in small yellow ducks. On his forehead, half hidden beneath the dark comma of his fringe, was a scar shaped like a lightning bolt. It was fresh. It was raw. And it was doing something that scars do not normally do. It was glowing, very faintly, with the residual energy of something catastrophic that had passed through it recently. Not magic, exactly. Or not only magic. Something older. Something that had briefly touched the place where the living world ends and whatever comes after it begins. Amaterasu crouched in the doorway. She did not speak. She reached out and laid one finger, very gently, against the scar on the child's forehead, and she was silent for a long moment. Then she said, softly, "He died tonight." "I know," Susanoo said from behind her. "He died, and then he didn't." Her voice had changed. The measuring quality was still there, but beneath it was something warmer, and beneath that something raw. A piece of something terrible tried to anchor itself to his soul on the way out. He carried it back with him. He's carrying it right now and he doesn't know. He's 15 months old and he's sleeping with a fragment of a dead man's worst self lodged behind his scar and someone put him in a cupboard. The letter on the doorstep said the best place for him, Susanoo said. I read it on the way in. Did it? It was from a wizard. Old man. Apparently thinks quite highly of himself. Amaterasu stood up. She looked down at the child for another moment. The baby stirred in his sleep, turned his head slightly, and made a small sound, not distressed, just the arbitrary sounds of a dreaming infant, utterly unaware of the 2 divine beings currently regarding him with an attention that was shifting, second by second, into something unmistakable. He's not staying here, Susanoo said. No, Amaterasu agreed. He's not. Neither of them phrased it as a question. That was the thing about gods, they did not ask the universe for permission. They simply decided, and the universe adjusted itself accordingly, because that was how the arrangement worked. Amaterasu reached into the cupboard and lifted the baby with the practiced ease of someone who has, in various forms and centuries, been a mother before. The child's eyes opened. They were brilliantly, impossibly green, the green of new leaves against a bright sky, startling and vivid in the dim hallway. He looked at Amaterasu with the complete, uncomplicated attention of a baby who has not yet learned to be afraid of strangers, and then he reached up and grabbed a fistful of her hair. Susanoo made a sound that, if you were being uncharitable, you might describe as a laugh. Don't, Amaterasu said, without looking at him. I didn't say anything. You were about to. The baby looked at Susanoo over Amaterasu's shoulder. His green eyes went wide with the particular delight of a child who has spotted something loud and interesting, and he made a grabbing motion in Susanoo's direction. Susanoo looked at Amaterasu. Amaterasu looked at Susanoo. The baby looked between them with bright, satisfied curiosity. Well, Susanoo said. Yes, Amaterasu said. We're doing this. We're doing this. Susanoo reached out and put one large hand briefly on the top of Harry's head, carefully, gently, with a tenderness that would have surprised anyone who only knew him as the god who cut a mountain in half during a bad mood 3,000 years ago. The baby gurgled and grabbed his finger. All right, little storm, Susanoo said quietly. Let's go. The hallway of number 4 Privet Drive went dark. The door did not open. The locks did not turn. And in the morning, when Petunia Desley came downstairs to make tea and discovered the empty cupboard and the note that had been left on the kitchen table, a single sheet of paper bearing only 2 characters in a script she didn't recognize, and beneath them, in plain English, "He belongs to the sky now." She told herself it was none of her business, put the kettle on, and did not mention it to Vernon for a week. Harry's first clear memory, not the impressions and fragments that all children carry from their earliest years, but a real, solid, narrative memory, was of Amaterasu teaching him to read. He was 4. They were sitting on a flat rock in the Shinto shrine complex outside Ise that served, in a somewhat informal sense, as the household of the goddess of the sun, though calling it a household was like calling the Pacific Ocean a puddle. The complex was ancient and vast and serene, all deep cedar forest and white gravel paths and the smell of incense moving through still mountain air. Harry had grown up in it the way fish grow up in the sea, totally, unremarkably, taking it as the basic texture of existence. Amaterasu was going through kanji with him. She would draw a character in the air with one finger, it would hang there in gold light, perfectly formed, and Harry would trace it back, and the character would respond to his touch, shifting from gold to warm white. "Again," she said. "I did it right," Harry said. "You did it correctly." Correctly and well are different things. Harry gave her the flat look of a 4-year-old who understands this distinction perfectly and disagrees with it on principle. She looked back at him with the absolute, serene patience of someone who has been dealing with exactly this look from children for several millennia. Harry did it again, more carefully this time. The character bloomed white gold under his finger and held there, steady and clean. "Better," she said. "Can I go find Susanoo now?" "You can go find Susanoo now." He was already running. Susanoo was out past the tree-line, in the wide meadow that served no particular sacred purpose except that it was large enough for the things Susanoo liked to do when he was bored. Currently he was doing something with lightning, pulling it down from a clear sky in long, crackling bolts and then shaping it into forms, not because it served any purpose, just because he could. Harry arrived at the edge of the meadow at full sprint, skidded to a stop and stared at the current shape with deep satisfaction. It was a horse. A lightning horse, rearing up against the afternoon sky, mane streaming in the electrical charge of its own body. "Cool," Harry breathed. Susanoo looked down at him. "Finished your characters?" "Yes." "Did you do them well or just correctly?" Harry groaned. "You and Amaterasu practiced that." Susanoo grinned, which on his face was a broad, unself-conscious thing, a grin that took over his whole face and made the air pressure drop slightly from sheer atmospheric sympathy. He dispersed the lightning horse, it dissolved into a shower of sparks that drifted down like slow fireworks, and dropped to one knee so he was more or less at Harry's level. "Come here," he said, and held out one hand, palm up. Harry put his own small hand in it without hesitation. "Feel that," Susanoo said. Harry concentrated. It took him a moment, he was 4, and the concentration required was substantial, but then he felt it. A current. Not electricity, exactly, but something that ran alongside electricity the way a river runs alongside a road, parallel, related, going to the same place by a different route. It was in Susanoo's palm and it was in Harry's hand and it ran between them like a closed circuit. "That's yours," Susanoo said. "Some of it. A piece of the storm lives in you. We put it there. You were born with part of it already, that scar of yours is a weather vane, kid, it points toward what's real, but we gave you the rest. Do you understand what that means?" Harry thought about it seriously, the way he thought about everything Susanoo told him, because Susanoo was funny and loud and tremendous fun to be around, but when he said "do you understand" he always meant it as an actual question. "It means I'm part storm," Harry said. "Part storm," Susanoo confirmed. "And part sun," Harry finished. He held up his other hand, the one that wasn't in Susanoo's, and concentrated. It took more effort, it always took more effort with Amaterasu's gift, because sunlight required a kind of stillness that did not come naturally to Harry, and he suspected it didn't come naturally to Susanoo either, which was perhaps why they got along so well. But it came. A warm, steady light collected in his palm, not bright enough to hurt, just bright, the exact quality of morning sun coming through clean water. Susanoo looked at both Harry's hands, one crackling faintly with potential storm, one holding a small, stable sun, and something crossed his face that was not his usual grin. It was older and quieter and very serious. "Part sun," he agreed. "You're not a wizard, Harry. You're not a wizard either. You're something that doesn't have a box yet. Don't let anyone put you in one." Harry nodded, with the earnest confidence of a child who has absolutely no reason to doubt this and won't for many years. "Now," Susanoo said, standing up and the grin reasserting itself in full force, "let's see how hard you can make it rain." It rained for 6 hours. Half the shrine complex got soaked. Amaterasu came to find them at hour 3 with an expression that said she was not surprised, and stayed to watch for the rest of it, which said everything. He grew up fast and he grew up well, which is a different thing. By 6 he could meditate for an hour without losing the thread. By 7 he was running 5 kilometers every morning with Susanoo, who ran at a pace that required Harry to pour genuine effort into keeping up, because Susanoo did not do easy. Susanoo believed that the surest way to make anything stronger was to require it to be. By 8 he was studying the old texts, not just Japanese, but Sanskrit, classical Chinese, ancient Greek, because Amaterasu believed that the divine spoke in every language and a person who could only read one was missing most of the conversation. He also studied magic. Specifically the kind that the wizarding world in the West would call wandless, wordless magic, the direct channeling of will into effect, and Susanoo taught it the way he taught everything, which was by doing it himself extravagantly and then waiting to see if Harry could figure out how it worked by watching closely enough. He usually could. But they also told him about England. About Hogwarts. About the wizarding world he'd come from and would eventually return to. Amaterasu was precise about this. She sat him down when he was 7 and she told him everything, with the same calm clarity she brought to every difficult truth. She told him about his parents. She told him about the night on Privet Drive. She told him about the scar, and what it held, and what it meant. Harry was quiet for a long time after she finished. They were sitting in the main hall of the shrine, evening light coming in through the paper screens, and Harry was looking at his own hands. "Voldemort killed my parents," he said. "Not a question." "Yes. And he's not fully dead." "No. Not yet. Because of the scar. Because of several things, which we will address in time." Harry looked up at her. His green eyes were clear and direct. Already, at 7, there was no flinching in him, no looking away from hard things. "You're not afraid of him," he said. "No," Amaterasu said simply. "Should I be?" She considered this, because she did not deal in comforting lies. "You should understand him clearly. You should take him seriously. You should not underestimate what he is capable of." "But fear?" She shook her head. "Fear is what he relies on. He built his power entirely on other people's fear of him. Without it he's a man who made bad choices and called it ambition." She paused. "And you, Harry, are not a person who was made to be afraid." Harry sat with that. "Then, can I go tell Susanoo?" "He already knows. I want to hear what he says about it." She almost smiled. "Go." Susanoo, when told, said, "Good. Now you have context. Now you know why we've been training you, and what it's for, and where you're going. Does it change how you feel?" Harry thought about it honestly. "Kind of," he admitted. "Like, now there's a reason. Before it was just what we did. Now it's for something." "It was always for something," Susanoo said. "Everything is for something, even before you know what. But yeah, now you've got a direction." He clapped Harry on the shoulder with enough force to make a lesser child stagger, though Harry only shifted his weight slightly and absorbed it. "So let's not waste it." By the time Harry was 10, Amaterasu had begun adding something new to his training. Restraint. Not hiding, she was very clear on that, and he remembered her exact words because they landed somewhere important. There is a difference between restraint and concealment. Concealment is shame made practical. Restraint is power made precise. What she was teaching him was not to suppress what he was but to aim it. To understand that the difference between the sun and a fire is not intensity, it is control. The sun does not burn less brightly than a fire. It burns with absolute consistency, at exactly the temperature required to sustain everything that depends on it, for longer than fire has language to describe. She also taught him about people. About reading a room. About the difference between someone who was wrong and someone who was dishonest. About institutions, their value and their arrogance and the specific way power tends to accumulate around those who want it most rather than those who can use it best. Hogwarts, she said one afternoon. Tell me what you know. Harry, who had spent the past 3 years reading everything he could find about the wizarding world, answered without hesitation. Oldest and most prestigious wizarding school in Britain. Founded 1,000 years ago by Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, Rowena Ravenclaw, and Salazar Slytherin. Current headmaster is Albus Dumbledore, widely considered the greatest living wizard. And what do you think of that? He paused. Greatest living wizard is a specific category, he said slowly. Humans measuring themselves against other humans. Amaterasu looked at him with that expression, the one that meant he'd landed somewhere she'd been steering him toward. Go on. It doesn't include anyone outside the category. Doesn't include beings that aren't human. Doesn't include anything that doesn't fit the measurement system they're using. He frowned. Which means the title is true in a way that also makes it meaningless if you're standing outside it. So what does it mean for you? That I should respect what he's accomplished in the category he's working in, Harry said. And that I shouldn't automatically assume his framework is the right framework just because he's the best at it. Susanoo, who had come in halfway through this conversation and was leaning in the doorway eating an apple, said, "That's my boy." Amaterasu did not turn around. "You're not supposed to be here. I was passing. You were listening at the door." "I was passing very slowly." Harry grinned. Amaterasu's expression did not change, but something in her eyes warmed. The letter arrived on Harry's 11th birthday, which was July 31st, and he was already expecting it. It arrived, slightly puzzlingly, at the exact moment that 3 other letters arrived from 3 other directions, a formal scroll tied with the red and gold cord of the Ministry of Magic, a note from someone named Minerva McGonagall that was significantly warmer in tone than the official Hogwarts letter, and a 3rd letter that bore no return address and smelled faintly of something old and powerful that Harry couldn't immediately identify. He brought all 4 to the kitchen table where Amaterasu was writing correspondence of her own. She maintained communication with the divine apparatus of about 14 different traditions, which involved a frankly extraordinary volume of paperwork, and set them in front of her. She looked at them for a moment. Picked up the unaddressed letter. "Read it." Her expression didn't change, but something about the quality of her stillness shifted. "Dumbledore," she said. "Which one is from him?" "This one." She tapped the unmarked letter. "He's known where you are for several years. He's been waiting to see whether to make contact before your letter arrived or let the letter speak for him." She set it down. "He chose the letter. What does he want?" "The same thing he always wanted." She looked at Harry directly. "He's been planning your life for 10 years. He had a shape in mind for you, a role, a story, a particular ending. He wants to know if you'll walk into it." Harry picked up the Hogwarts letter and turned it over in his hands. His name was written in emerald ink in a hand that was precise and architectural and took up exactly the space it needed and no more. "Mr. H. Potter." "I'm going to Hogwarts," he said. "Yes." "And I'm going as what I am." "Yes." "And if Dumbledore's plan requires me to be something smaller than that, then Dumbledore will have to revise his plan," Amaterasu said, with the tone of someone who has been revising other people's plans since before recorded history and finds it neither difficult nor particularly interesting. Susanoo appeared in the doorway, he appeared in doorways the way weather appeared, without particular ceremony, and said, "Are we talking about the Hogwarts thing?" "We're talking about the Hogwarts thing," Harry confirmed. "Great." Susanoo pulled out a chair and sat down with the energy of someone who has been waiting for this conversation for years and is very glad it's finally happening. "So. Here's the thing about going into someone else's institution. You're going to walk in and they're going to have a whole framework for understanding you. Famous, the boy who lived, whatever that means to them. They'll either want to make you a symbol or manage you like a liability, and probably both at different times." "I know," Harry said. "You know intellectually," Susanoo said. "Knowing it in a room full of people who are doing it is different. So the question isn't whether they'll try. The question is how you want to handle it when they do." Harry looked down at the letter in his hands. He thought about what Amaterasu had taught him about precision. He thought about what Susanoo had taught him about weather, about how a storm doesn't need to prove itself to the landscape it's moving through, it's just a storm, and the landscape adjusts. He thought about the 8-year-old version of himself standing in a meadow with one palm full of lightning and one full of sunlight. "Honestly," he said. Susanoo waited. "I'll handle it honestly. I won't pretend to be less than I am to make anyone comfortable. I won't pretend to be more than I am to impress anyone either. I'll just," he stopped. "Found the word. I'll be accurate." Susanoo was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up and crossed the room and put both hands on Harry's shoulders and looked at him, not with the grin, not with the performer's energy that animated most of his interactions, but with something straight and clear and very serious. "Your parents were brave people," he said. "Your father was funny and clever and reckless in the way of people who've never had reason to doubt their own good luck. Your mother was one of the most gifted magical humans of her century and she was kind in a way that cost her something, the real kind of kindness. They would have been good parents to you." He paused. "But what you are now, Harry, what we made you, what you made yourself, they couldn't have done that. I want you to know that I don't say that as a boast. I say it because you're going to walk into that school and you're going to meet children whose parents raised them well and they're going to be good people and good friends. And I don't want you comparing what you are to what they are, because it's not a competition. You are what you are and it's not because of anything they lack." Harry looked up at him. His green eyes were bright. "I know," he said. And meant it. Amaterasu, without looking up from her correspondence, said, "He leaves in September. Diagon Alley is in 3 weeks. I will take him." "I want to come," Susanoo said. "You are not coming." "Why not?" "Because the last time you were in a wizarding marketplace you caused a weather event that the Ministry of Magic logged as an unexplained magical anomaly and is still trying to classify." Susanoo looked at Harry. "It was one thunderstorm." "It was 7 thunderstorms," Amaterasu said serenely. "Simultaneously. In July." Harry was already grinning. The night before Diagon Alley, Harry sat on the roof of the shrine and looked at the stars. This was a habit of his, had been since he was about 6, when he'd first learned to get onto the roof without Susanoo's help. The shrine complex sat in a valley ringed by low mountains, and on clear nights the stars were extraordinary, unmediated by the light pollution of towns. Harry had been taught the constellations in 5 different traditions' naming systems and knew which stars were visible in which seasons and could navigate by them. But mostly he just liked sitting up here. He was thinking about England. He'd been to England twice since the night he'd left Privet Drive, brief trips, both of them, with Amaterasu, to see something of the country he'd technically been born in. He'd stood outside Hogwarts once, on a misty November afternoon, and looked at the castle across the lake. It had struck him then as both smaller and larger than he'd expected, smaller as an object, larger as an idea, as a thing that carried the weight of 1,000 years of human striving toward understanding. He wanted to go. He'd wanted to go, actually, for years, not because it was Hogwarts specifically, but because he was 11 years old and he wanted to be in a place with people his own age, doing the work of learning things he hadn't yet learned, with the texture of a real institution around him rather than the timeless, sacred calm of the shrine. He also wanted to understand magic the way wizards understood it. He had divine gifts, he knew what they were and how they worked, but the framework the wizarding world used, the specific grammar of wands and spells and potion-making and the long-accumulated human scholarship of magical practice, that was real too, and different, and worth knowing. The wind moved through the cedar trees below him. He heard a sound, the specific sound of displaced air pressure that preceded Susanoo's arrival when he wasn't bothering to walk, and then the god was sitting beside him on the roof, which creaked very slightly in acknowledgement. They sat in silence for a while. "I'm ready," Harry said, not because Susanoo had asked, but because it wanted to be said. "I know," Susanoo said. "Are you going to say something profound?" Susanoo considered. "No," he said. "I think I've probably said enough profound things today. Let's just sit here." Harry nodded. Below them, the shrine was quiet. The incense had burned out hours ago. In the main hall, a lamp was still lit, Amaterasu's lamp, burning with the steady, measured light of someone who was still awake, still working, and would be long after Harry fell asleep. Burning with the particular quality of someone who was not worried because worry implied doubt, and she did not doubt. She had made something. She had watched it become itself. She was not afraid of what happened next. The stars turned overhead. Harry put one hand flat on the roof tiles beside him and felt, not deliberately, just in the ambient, automatic way of someone who had been doing this for years, the current of the world. The magnetic hum of the earth. The pressure of the atmosphere. The faint, constant radiation of solar wind washing over the planet's magnetic field like water over stone. It was all there, all the time, enormous and indifferent and entirely available to him if he reached for it. He was going to go to school. He was going to walk into a castle full of people who thought they knew who he was, the famous Harry Potter, the boy who lived, the tragedy and the symbol and the neat narrative ending that everyone had been holding ready for him since the night his parents died, and he was going to be something much more specific and much less manageable than any of that. He was going to be Harry. Son of Lily and James Potter, who had died bravely and deserved to be remembered as people rather than plot points. Child of Amaterasu and Susanoo, gods of the sun and storm, who had found him in a cupboard and decided, not asked, not hoped, simply decided, that he was theirs. God of sun and storm himself, or the beginning of one, 11 years old and sitting on a roof in Japan with the whole sky above him and the whole world ahead of him. The wind picked up. The cedar trees moved. Harry looked up at the stars and smiled. Chapter 2, The boy the world wasn't ready for. Diagon Alley smelled like possibility and old wood and something burnt that Harry couldn't quite identify, some combination of cauldron fumes and spell residue and the specific magical ozone of a place where a lot of people had been doing unusual things for a very long time. He stood at the entrance to the leaky cauldron on a bright August morning with Amaterasu beside him and his Hogwarts letter in his back pocket and took it all in with the calm, deliberate attention she'd taught him. Amaterasu had dressed for the occasion in the way she approached most things, precisely. She wore Western clothes today, which she did when she wanted to observe without drawing attention, though the phrase, without drawing attention, applied to Amaterasu the way it applied to a solar eclipse, technically accurate in terms of intent, somewhat ambitious in practice. Her coat was deep rust-colored wool. Her hair was pinned up. She wore no obvious jewelry, but the air around her had that quality, the warmth without source quality, the sensation of standing in full sun on a clear day. 3 people turned to look at her as they walked through the leaky cauldron. Tom the barman nearly dropped a glass. A wizard at the back corner looked up from his daily profit and didn't look back down again. Harry didn't notice. He was looking at the wall. Tap the 3rd brick from the left, Amaterasu said. 2nd from the arch. You've read the instructions. Harry pulled out his wand, they'd bought it before coming, from a wand maker in Kyoto with a shop that was even narrower and more cluttered than he'd read Ollivander's would be, run by a woman of about 90 who took one look at Harry and said, "Holly and Phoenix Feather will be waiting for you in England, don't let the old man make a fuss about it," and tapped the brick. The wall opened. It didn't just open, it unfurled, bricks peeling back in a spiral like a time-lapse of a flower blooming, and beyond it was Diagon Alley in full August bustle, sunlit and loud and extraordinary. Robes in every color. Shop windows stacked with things that moved and sparked and occasionally appeared to be arguing with each other. The smell of fresh bread from somewhere and the smell of something considerably less pleasant from somewhere else. Children his age dragging their parents in multiple directions at once. Owls. Actual owls, in broad daylight, perched on things with the absolute indifference of creatures that have decided the opinion of anyone who finds them unusual is simply not relevant. Harry walked in and felt something settle in his chest. A rightness. Not because this was his home, Japan was his home, the shrine was his home, Amaterasu and Susanoo were his home, but because this was a part of what he was, a piece of his inheritance from James and Lily Potter, the world they'd lived and died in, and walking into it was like opening a book he'd been meaning to read for years and finding that the first page was exactly as good as he'd hoped. They went to Gringotts first. The bank was everything he'd read about, vast white marble, impossibly high ceilings, goblins at their stations with the specific energy of beings who are both very good at their job and comprehensively uninterested in making you feel welcome. Harry approached the nearest available teller with the direct, unhurried manner of someone who has been taught that politeness and deference are different things. "Harry Potter," he said. "I'm here to access my vault." The goblin looked at him. Something flickered in its expression. Goblins were not expressive in the way humans were, but there was a quality of assessment happening, a rapid and professional evaluation. The goblin's eyes moved briefly to Amaterasu, standing 2 steps behind Harry, and whatever it saw there made it sit slightly straighter. "Key," it said. Harry produced the key. Dumbledore had sent it along with a note that had arrived separately from the letter, brief and carefully worded, explaining the vault and its contents in the tone of someone who had expected to deliver this information in person and was slightly thrown by not getting that opportunity. Harry had read the note, kept the key, and not responded to the note. The vault was extraordinary. Not just for the gold, which was genuinely substantial. His parents had apparently been from quite old wizarding families who had accumulated wealth with the quiet efficiency of people who were good at magic and had several generations to apply it, but for what the gold meant. His parents had lived. They had worked. They had accumulated the specific material evidence of human lives fully engaged with the world. Harry stood in the vault for a moment and let himself feel the weight of that, the real human grief that lived alongside everything else he was, before he filled the pouch and left. Outside Gringotts, in the sun, Amaterasu fell into step beside him. "All right?" she asked. "Yes," he said. And then, more honestly, "It's more real here." They were more real here. "They were entirely real," she said. "They were exactly as real as you are." He nodded, and they walked. Madame Malkin's was an experience. Harry was being measured, standing on the stool, arms out, while the tape measure did its autonomous thing, when the door opened and another boy came in, directed to the stool beside him. The boy was pale and blond, with a pointed face that had been arranged into an expression of habitual confidence that Harry recognized immediately as the expression of someone who has been told their whole life that they are important and has accepted this as a reasonable description of reality. "Hogwarts," the boy said, without preamble, looking at Harry with the assessing energy of someone sorting the social landscape. "Yes," Harry said. "Same. Know what house you'll be in?" "No." The boy looked slightly put out by this. He'd clearly been expecting either enthusiasm or ignorance, and Harry's flat neutrality apparently fit neither. "Well, I know I'll be in Slytherin. All my family's been in Slytherin. My father says." He stopped and looked at Harry more carefully, the calculation in his eyes becoming more obvious. "You're not British." "I grew up in Japan." The boy blinked. "Japan." He processed this. "My name's Malfoy. Draco Malfoy." He said it the way people say names when the name is supposed to do some of the conversational work. Harry had been taught to read exactly this kind of social shorthand, and found it mildly interesting as a data point rather than impressive. Harry Potter, he said. The response was immediate and involuntary. Draco's poise cracked for 1 second, just one, a flash of genuine shock before the composure reassembled itself. His eyes went to Harry's forehead, but Harry's fringe was down and the scar was covered. "You're Harry Potter." "That's what I said." Draco collected himself. Right. Well. He reset. "I heard you'd been found, that you were somewhere. People said you'd been living with Muggles." "I wasn't," Harry said pleasantly. "Where were you?" "Japan." "You just said, who were you with?" Harry considered how much to say and decided on enough. "My parents." Draco looked at him with the expression of someone whose data doesn't match his model and who isn't sure what to do about that. Before he could pursue it further, Madame Malkin declared Harry's robe complete and he stepped off the stool. "See you at school," Harry said, and left. Amaterasu was waiting outside. She had been looking at a display of dress robes in the window with the polite interest of someone who finds human fashion choices genuinely bewildering but is too well-mannered to say so. "Malfoy," Harry said, falling into step beside her. "I heard," she said. "You were outside." "I have very good hearing." "The whole alley has very good hearing, apparently." He glanced back at the shop. "He's not bad. He's been taught to be what he is and he's doing a decent job of it. But there's something underneath the performance." "What kind of something?" Harry thought about it. "Uncertainty. He knows exactly who he is in his family's framework. He's not sure whether that framework is the whole world or just his family's part of it." He paused. "He'll figure that out at school, one way or another." Amaterasu looked at him sideways. "You're not going to dislike him simply because he's been raised to value the wrong things. Disliking someone for what they were taught before they were old enough to question it seems like a waste of energy," Harry said. "I'll see what he does with it." She made a sound that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to one. Flourish and blots took 40 minutes and Harry would have stayed 3 hours if Amaterasu hadn't pointed out that they still needed ingredients and an owl. He bought everything on the list and then added 6 extra titles, a history of magical traditions in East Asia, which he found satisfyingly thorough, a text on wandless magic theory that was interesting for what it got almost right, and a copy of Magical Theory by Adalbert Waffling that he'd already read in translation but wanted in the original English. The owl took 10 minutes to choose. He walked into the shop and an owl chose him, which is a different experience entirely, a small, extremely alert tawny bird that fixed him with bright amber eyes the moment he crossed the threshold and made a decisive sound. Harry looked at it. It looked at him. He bought it and named it Kaze, which was the Japanese word for wind, because Susanoo would appreciate that. He was loading Kaze's cage onto his arm when he heard his name. Not spoken, written, on a placard in the window of Flourish and Blots across the street, which now bore a sign he hadn't noticed on the way in, special appearance, Gilderoy Lockhart, signing copies of his new autobiography, today only. And below it, visible through the glass, a crowd of witches pressing forward toward a man with extravagant golden hair and the practiced smile of someone who has been performing confidence for so long it has become structurally load-bearing. Harry watched through the window for a moment. Lockhart caught someone's eye and performed his smile with the precision of a stage actor, angling his jaw slightly, and Harry felt a wash of something that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite amusement but lived somewhere between them. He filed the observation away. Then, from across the street, a different kind of attention. 2 voices, mid-argument, or rather, one voice arguing and one voice failing to get a word in. "Don't see why we need to get everything on the list today, Mum. We could come back. Ronald Weasley, your robes from last year have a hole in the elbow. We are absolutely." Harry turned. A tall red-headed woman was navigating the crowd with the practiced efficiency of someone who has been taking multiple children shopping simultaneously for a decade and has developed the spatial awareness of an air traffic controller. Behind her, a cluster of red-haired children at various heights, all wearing the specific expression of people who are doing something dutiful rather than chosen. Except for one girl near the back who was reading a textbook while walking, which Harry found immediately interesting. And beside the woman, nearly her height already at what appeared to be 11, a boy with red hair and freckles and an expression that contained, underneath the dutiful shopping face, a lively intelligence and something Harry could only describe as a deep and genuine hunger for interesting things to happen. Their eyes met across the crowd for a moment. The red-haired boy blinked. Harry nodded slightly, the way you nod at someone you expect to meet again. The boy gave a slightly surprised nod back, as if he wasn't sure what the exchange meant but felt it had probably been important. Then the crowd shifted and Amaterasu touched Harry's arm. "Cauldrons," she said. The moment Harry hadn't been entirely sure he was ready for came at the end of the day, in the late afternoon, when Diagon Alley had thinned out and the shadows were going long and gold between the buildings. They were sitting outside the leaky cauldron with tea. Amaterasu took her tea the way she did most things, with complete authority and precise temperature requirements, and Harry was watching the alley and thinking about the fact that in 3 weeks he was going to get on a train and go to Scotland and this woman sitting across from him was going to go back to Japan. "You're going to be fine," Amaterasu said, without looking up from her tea. "I know," he said. "You're also going to miss us." "I know that too." She did look up then. Her amber eyes were warm and direct and absolutely steady. "Missing something is not the same as losing it. We are not going anywhere. We will know when you need us, and we will come if it is warranted, and it will not be warranted very often because you are more than capable." She paused. "But also, the people you're going to meet. Some of them will become important. Let them." Harry looked at her. "I know you know how to be alone," she said. "I know you find your own company sufficient, which is healthy. But there is a kind of courage in letting yourself need people. Real people. Human people who will sometimes be wrong and sometimes let you down and will eventually get older and," she stopped. Something crossed her face, brief, real, the thing she kept very carefully behind the serenity. "Let them matter. It's worth it." He understood, suddenly, what she wasn't saying. That she had been alone for a very long time before this. That divinity was vast and permanent and came with a loneliness that had no name in human language. That the 11 years she'd had him had been, he knew this, had known it since he was old enough to understand the scale of her existence, the specific and irreplaceable gift of something finite and present in his. "Okay," he said, quietly. "I will." She picked up her tea. The conversation was complete. September 1st was an assault on the senses. King's Cross Station at rush hour on a weekday was already a great deal. Harry navigated it with the focused calm of someone who has walked through monsoons and found the eye of the storm something of a relief by comparison, but platform 9 3/4 was something else entirely. He found the entrance without difficulty, pushed through the barrier without hesitation, and walked onto the platform and into a wall of noise and steam and the smell of engine smoke and owl feathers and someone's leaking potion ingredients and approximately 300 conversations happening simultaneously. The Hogwarts Express was magnificent. He stood and looked at it for a moment, scarlet engine, long carriages, the platform activity of something genuinely departing, genuinely going somewhere real, and felt the rightness again, warm and solid in his chest. He found a compartment without too much difficulty. The platform was crowded and most families were doing goodbye sequences that required significant space, and Harry's goodbye had already happened. Amaterasu had seen him to the barrier, said right, and the way she said it contained everything that a longer goodbye would have contained, which was why she said it that way. He'd nodded. Gone through. He stowed his trunk, settled Kaze's cage on the rack, and sat down by the window. 5 minutes later the compartment door slid open and the red-haired boy from Diagon Alley looked in. Are these seats taken?" he asked, with the slightly awkward energy of someone who has drawn the conversational short straw on behalf of a larger group. "No," Harry said. "Right. Brilliant." The boy came in, followed immediately by another boy, twin to someone left on the platform, apparently, because he turned back and made a face at the window before sitting down. "I'm Ron. Ron Weasley. Harry Potter." Ron opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Right, he said carefully. Yeah, okay. I thought you might be. He sat down properly. Sorry. It's just, everyone always wants to, you're quite famous. I know, Harry said. You don't have to treat it like it's awkward. It's fine. Ron seemed visibly relieved by this. Okay. Good. Is that a tawny? Your owl. Kaze. Yes. What does that mean? Wind. Ron nodded, and the particular nod of someone mentally filing this away suggested he found it interesting rather than just polite. My owl's named Scabbers, he said, then paused. Wait, no, Scabbers is my rat. My owl doesn't, I don't have an owl. That's my brother's. He stopped, clearly having lost the thread. Sorry. I do know how to talk. Harry was already smiling. He couldn't help it. There was something about Ron, an open, unself-conscious quality, the lively intelligence underneath the slightly tangled social presence, that he found immediately likable. The kind of person who would tell you what he actually thought, not because he'd been taught to be honest, but because the effort of managing the gap between thinking and saying seemed to him more exhausting than just speaking. Do you know what house you'll be in? Ron asked. No. I'll be Gryffindor, Ron said, with the tone of someone quoting a foregone conclusion. Everyone in my family's been Gryffindor. My mum, my dad, all my brothers. It's sort of, he paused. Do you know about houses? Yes. Then you'll know it's sort of a whole thing in some families. He pulled a slightly squashed sandwich from his bag. What about you? Have you got family here? Wizarding family? Harry considered the honest answer to this question. My parents were Gryffindors, he said. Both of them. Were. They died. When I was a baby. Ron had the good grace to look genuinely uncomfortable rather than performing discomfort. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. It's all right. I had good parents. Harry paused. Different parents. After. Ron looked at him with that direct, curious gaze again. What were they like? Where were you? Everyone always wondered, everyone at school and stuff, people said you'd been found but nobody knew where you'd been before. Japan, Harry said. They're not wizards. Different kind of thing entirely. Ron waited to see if more was coming, and when it became clear that more was coming only if asked directly, he asked directly, what kind of thing? Harry looked at him. Decided. Divine, he said simply. Ron stared at him. Chewed his sandwich. Swallowed. Right, he said, in the tone of someone mentally updating their model of the world at significant speed. So when you say divine, gods, Harry said. Japanese gods. Sun and storm. Another pause. Ron looked at the ceiling briefly, looked back. And are you a wizard? Also a wizard. Yes. And, the other thing, also the other thing. Ron nodded slowly. Then, with the pragmatic acceptance of someone who has grown up in a family where unusual things are simply Tuesday, can you do something with it? Can I see? Harry held up one hand and let a small, warm light collect in his palm. Not the showy version, the measured version, the precise version, the sunlight through clean water version. It sat there in the dim compartment, steady and golden, and cast no shadow. Ron stared at it. Wicked, he breathed. Harry let it go. Don't make a big deal of it, he said, not unkindly. No, obviously, yeah. Ron was still looking at Harry's hand. Are you going to tell people? I'm not going to hide it, Harry said. I'm also not going to announce it. People will work it out. Ron nodded. The train gave a long whistle and began, with a great shudder and exhalation of steam, to move. The platform slid backward past the window. Harry watched it go. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Sure," Ron said. "Why did you nod at me? In Diagon Alley. You didn't know who I was." Ron blinked. "Didn't I? I must have just," he frowned. "I don't know, actually. You just seemed like someone who was going somewhere interesting." He shrugged. "I was right, wasn't I?" Hermione Granger arrived at their compartment 2 hours north of London, looking for a toad belonging to a boy named Neville, and did not find the toad but stayed anyway because she was the kind of person who assessed a situation quickly and decided what was worth her time with the brisk efficiency of someone who has very clear priorities and zero patience for wasting the limited hours of human existence on things that didn't merit them. She sat down, introduced herself with the confident brevity of someone who considers names a formality to get through before the real conversation, looked at Harry's extra textbooks with visible interest, and said, "You've already read those." "Most of them," Harry confirmed. "So have I." She looked at him appraisingly. "You marked this one." She meant the Adalbert waffling. "I can see the tabs." He gets the underlying theory mostly right but makes a significant error in Chapter 7 about the relationship between intent and effect, Harry said. I disagreed with it enough to want to remember where it was. Hermione looked at him with the expression of someone who has found something unexpected and is not sure yet whether to be pleased or challenged by it, and settled on both. "I thought the same thing," she said. "He underestimates intent completely. He treats magic like it's purely mechanical, but it's not," Harry said. "It responds to what you mean, not just what you say. The words are a framework for intent, not a substitute for it." "Exactly," Hermione said, with the energy of someone who has been wanting to say that for months and finally found an audience. "I've been trying to explain that to, well, it doesn't matter, nobody wanted to discuss it." Ron was looking between them. "You two are going to be terrible," he said, but he was smiling, and the smile had the particular quality of someone who has just understood something important about the next several years. They talked all the way to Hogsmeade. Not only about magic theory, about all kinds of things, veering with the natural logic of good conversation from topic to topic, the kind of conversation that feels like it's going somewhere even when it's not going anywhere in particular. Harry noticed that Hermione was remarkably quick and remarkably informed and had a tendency toward certainty that was mostly earned but occasionally ran slightly ahead of the evidence. He noticed that Ron was funnier than he seemed on first meeting and had a strategic mind that was most visible when he talked about chess, which he was apparently very good at. He noticed that neither of them, after the first adjustment period, seemed particularly thrown by what he was. That was more significant than he could properly explain. He'd spent 11 years with divine beings who saw him clearly. He'd been braced, somewhere quiet in himself, for the possibility that the human world would only see the symbol, the famous boy, the scar, the story. That he'd spend years navigating people's projections. And that would still happen, he knew. It would happen a great deal. But here, in this compartment, the first two people he'd properly talked to in the wizarding world were already talking to him, actually to him, with the natural ease of people who were simply responding to what he actually was. He let himself be glad about that. The boats across the lake were beautiful. The castle was more beautiful. Harry had seen it from across the lake once before, in mist, at a distance. Up close, in the blue dusk of a September evening with torchlight in the windows and the lake black and still around the boats, it was something else. It was 1,000 years of human beings believing in something hard enough to build it in stone, and the stone had absorbed all that belief and was radiating it back outward. Harry could feel it, the deep, layered magical resonance of the place, the way it sat on its foundations and hummed. "You can feel it," Hermione said, beside him in the boat. "Not a question." "Can't you?" he asked. She hesitated. "Sort of. Like pressure. Or the feeling before a big storm." "That's it exactly," he said. Ron was in the next boat over and was trying not to fall into the lake, which occupied most of his attention. The doors opened. The entrance hall. A severe-looking woman with dark hair and square spectacles met them, Professor McGonagall, Harry recognized, the one who'd written the warm note, and she looked out at the assembled 11-year-olds with the practiced assessment of someone who has done this 40-plus times and still takes it entirely seriously. Her eyes found Harry immediately. Whatever she'd expected, and she had clearly expected something, it wasn't quite what she found. He saw it, the recalibration, the rapid reread of what was in front of her. She held his gaze for a moment with the look of someone making a careful decision about what to say, and then she moved on, and the moment closed. The sorting was in the great hall, which was staggering, the ceiling enchanted to show the sky outside, dark blue and starred, the 4 long tables, the candles, the watching faces of the older students with all their various assessments and expectations. Names were called in alphabetical order, which meant Harry was near the middle and had time to watch. The hat sang. It was a detailed hat. Harry found the concept elegant, a sorting mechanism that operated on genuine psychological assessment rather than arbitrary placement, though the rigid 4-way categorization clearly had limitations that anyone could see, and that the hat itself acknowledged in the song when it talked about the founders, though the hat was too diplomatic to press the point. He listened carefully. Hermione went before him, Gryffindor, with the hat barely touching her hair before it called it. She walked to the table with her chin slightly up and the expression of someone who had decided where they belonged and was glad to have it confirmed. Ron went. Gryffindor, with the relaxed inevitability of a foregone conclusion. Potter, Harry. The hall went quiet. Not the polite quiet of students waiting for a name to be sorted. The other kind of quiet, the charged kind, that happens when a room full of people all redirect their attention to a single point simultaneously. Harry walked from the wall to the stool with the steady, unhurried step of someone who finds this level of collective attention neither flattering nor particularly difficult, and sat down. The hat came down over his ears. And then, privately, in the way that was apparently how the hat worked, directly into the mind, it spoke. "Well," said the hat. "This is unusual." Harry waited. "You're not straightforwardly anything, are you?" The hat seemed to be experiencing something approaching genuine bewilderment, which Harry guessed didn't happen often. "Gryffindor, yes, the courage is there, and it's not performance, it's structural, it's simply how you're built. But there's also something that goes quite far beyond what Gryffindor was designed to contain." "I know," Harry said, in the silent way that the hat apparently facilitated. "Where would you like to go?" Harry was slightly surprised by the question's directness. "Gryffindor," he said. "My parents were Gryffindors. I'm not sentimental about it, but I'm not dismissive of it either. And I want to be where my friends are." "You made friends on the train?" "Yes." "You're not worried about being the most powerful person in the room?" "That's not a question." "No," said the hat. "It isn't. You're quite extraordinary, Mr. Potter. I expect the next 7 years will be interesting." It paused, and Harry had the distinct impression it was smiling, if hats could. "Better be, Gryffindor." The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry took the hat off, placed it back on the stool, and walked to the table. He sat beside Ron, who clapped him on the shoulder. Hermione, across the table, gave him a nod that managed to convey both welcome and satisfaction. He nodded back. From the head table, he could feel the weight of Dumbledore's gaze, measuring, warm, complex, and operating on several levels at once. He looked up and met it. Dumbledore was old and vivid and genuinely extraordinary. Harry could feel that even at this distance, the man radiated the specific quality of someone who had spent decades engaging fully with difficult things and had been changed by that engagement in ways both good and complex. He had half-moon spectacles and a long silver beard and eyes that were blue and impossibly bright and absolutely, completely, thoroughly convinced that they were looking at someone they already understood. Harry held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then he smiled, not the performance smile, not the symbol smile, just his smile, and looked away to where a first-year girl was being sorted into Slytherin and doing a small, private fist pump about it that Harry found charming. He felt Dumbledore still looking at him for several seconds longer. He let him look. The feast appeared. The candles burned. The ceiling showed clouds moving over stars. Harry ate and talked and listened to the particular layered music of the great hall, for tables of conversations, teachers at the high table, the odd creak of the ancient castle settling into another night of occupation, and found it, despite everything he was, despite every year of divine training and every gift he carried in his blood and bones, completely and genuinely wonderful. He was at school. He was actually, properly at school, with a stone ceiling above him and a warm meal in front of him and two people beside him who had already decided they were his friends, and somewhere in Japan two gods were going about their vast and ancient business and thinking of him, and his parents were nowhere and everywhere the way the dead are when they died for you, and the castle hummed with 1,000 years of belief under his feet. He put his fork down for one moment and looked up at the enchanted ceiling. The clouds parted, briefly, showing a deep field of stars. Harry looked back at his plate and ate his dinner and laughed at something Ron said and passed Hermione the bread, and the night went on. Chapter 3, Sun and Storm in the Corridors. The first week at Hogwarts established several things very quickly. First, Harry Potter was not what anyone had expected. The whisper network that ran through every school on Earth, that particular social infrastructure of rumor and second-hand observation, had been working on him since the moment the Sorting Hat announced his name, and by the time Monday morning arrived it had produced a fairly detailed portrait that was wrong in almost every particular. Some people had decided he was secretly arrogant, because he wasn't visibly overwhelmed. Some had decided he was strange, because he was too calm. The Slytherin table had spent the weekend constructing an elaborate theory about dark magic, which said more about the Slytherin table than about Harry. A second-year Gryffindor named Percy had attempted to give him a welcoming speech about the responsibilities of being a Gryffindor and a public figure, and Harry had listened politely for 45 seconds and then asked a question about the castle's structural wards that sent Percy careening off in an entirely different direction and never quite finding his way back. Second, Hermione Granger was going to be either his closest friend or his most challenging academic competitor, and he was fairly certain it was going to be both simultaneously, which suited him completely. Third, something was wrong with Professor Quirrell. This last one he'd noticed at the feast, which was where he noticed most things, because feasts were information-rich environments and he'd been taught to read them. Quirrell sat at the far end of the high table in a purple turban that smelled of garlic, and he had the physical effect of a man who was performing nervousness over something genuine and structural, not just an anxious person, but someone doing the continuous labor of managing what was underneath the anxiety. His eyes moved differently to everyone else's. Most people's eyes, when they moved, were following their attention. Quirrell's eyes moved like someone taking inventory. He filed it away. He was 11 years old and this was his first week of school and there would be time. The castle itself was wonderful. Not just aesthetically, though it was undeniably extraordinary, the way it combined genuine age with genuine magic into something that felt alive in the specific way that long-inhabited places feel alive, full of layers of presence. It was wonderful because it was complicated, because it had moving staircases that changed their minds and portraits that maintained running feuds across centuries and secret passages that weren't particularly secret if you had any sensitivity to the flow of magical architecture. Harry spent every spare moment of the first week exploring, sometimes with Ron, sometimes alone, always with the specific pleasure of someone who has been given a large and intricate thing to understand. Ron proved an excellent exploring companion because he'd grown up hearing about Hogwarts from his older brothers and had absorbed a considerable amount of institutional knowledge alongside a healthy disrespect for which rules were worth following, which Harry found useful. He also had a talent for finding food. This was not a trivial skill. "You're not nervous," Ron said on the third day, sitting on a window ledge in a corridor that the staircases had shuffled them into unexpectedly. It was a narrow corridor with arrow-slit windows looking out over the grounds, cold and dim and full of the particular silence of somewhere the main traffic of the school didn't reach. About classes. About any of it. Should I be? Everyone else is. Ron paused. I'm a bit nervous. Hermione's nervous and trying to look like she isn't, which is different to not being nervous. You don't have to be nervous on my behalf, Harry said. I'm fine. I know you're fine. I'm not nervous on your behalf. Ron looked at him with that direct, uncomplicated attention. It's just interesting. Most people who are as good at something as you are at magic are weird about it. They either show off or they downplay it. You just do it. Harry thought about how to answer that. Susanoo once made me stand in a field during a thunderstorm for 3 hours because I was being self-conscious about channeling lightning, he said. He said self-consciousness was just ego wearing shy clothes. Either you trust what you can do or you don't. Ron stared at him. Your dad made you stand in a thunderstorm. To be fair, he was the thunderstorm. Right. Ron swung his legs. What's it like? Having, divine parents. Harry considered the question properly, which Ron appreciated because Ron hated it when people answered questions they hadn't been asked. Normal, he said. Which I know sounds strange. But normal is just whatever you grow up with. The normal bit was everything: meals, arguments about homework, learning to read, Susanoo losing his temper and taking out a hillside, Amaterasu deciding I needed to understand classical Sanskrit before I was allowed to learn anything else. He paused. The not normal bit is knowing that the two people who love you most in the world have been alive for 10,000 years and will be alive for 10,000 more. It makes the present feel, he found the word. Specific. Very specifically now. Ron was quiet for a moment. My family's pretty loud, he said. 6 brothers, well, 5 brothers and I, Mum's a force of nature. Dad's obsessed with Muggle stuff. It's good, actually. It's really good, even when it's loud. He stopped, as if slightly surprised by his own sincerity. I think I know what you mean about specific. Because there's a lot of us and it's always moving and changing, so each bit of it is its own bit. Harry looked at him. Yes, he said. Exactly that. The staircase at the end of the corridor shifted back into accessibility, and they went to find Hermione. Classes were interesting for reasons that had everything to do with the gap between what magic could be and what was currently being done with it. This was not a criticism he felt any need to voice, because being condescending about other people's frameworks was something Amaterasu had specifically and repeatedly addressed with the directness she brought to all important things. The fact that you can see further does not mean the person standing on lower ground has bad eyes. It means they are standing somewhere different. Understanding where they are standing is more useful than commenting on what they can't see from there. So Harry sat in his classes and paid close attention and asked genuine questions and did the work with full effort, and the gap between his understanding and the curriculums was visible to him without being something he wore on his face. Transfiguration was the exception, not because the gap was smaller, but because Professor McGonagall was the kind of teacher who taught at the material rather than around it, who had no patience for the comfortable scaffolding of simplified explanation, who expected you to come to grips with the actual difficult thing rather than a tidy model of it. The first class had not gone the way she'd apparently planned it. She'd transformed her desk into a pig and back, which was genuinely impressive, fast, clean, total transformation, no residue of either form bleeding into the other. The class had reacted appropriately. She'd set them to turning matchsticks into needles. Harry had turned his matchstick into a needle before she finished explaining the technique. Not showing off, just doing the obvious thing, which was to use intent cleanly rather than following the wand movement for its own sake. The wand moved as an expression of intention, not a substitute for it, and the matchstick had simply agreed with his intention and become a needle. McGonagall came to his desk. Looked at the needle. Looked at Harry. How, she said, in the tone of someone setting down a book they've read before and picking up something new. The wand movement encodes intent, Harry said. If the intent is already precise, the wand movement is more of a formality. A structure. It helps, but it's not the source. Silence. 11-year-olds around them were still wrestling gamely with partially pointed matchsticks. Do it again, she said. With a different approach, use the movement as you would if you couldn't do it without it. Harry picked up a second matchstick and did it with the full wand movement, deliberately routing his intention through the formal structure of the spell rather than directly. The needle that resulted was identical to the first one, but the process was different. She could see the difference because she was looking for it. "Interesting," she said, in the specific way that meant she was going to think about something for a while. She stood up and continued the class. After, she kept him behind while the others filtered out. "Your wandless work," she said. "You've had training." "Yes," he said. "Formal. Someone taught you?" "Yes." She waited. "Not someone in the wizarding tradition," he said. "Different framework. The outcome overlaps but the path is different." McGonagall studied him. She had the eyes of someone who had spent 40 years reading students and had become very good at distinguishing what was being said from what was actually meant, and the two things Harry was saying were, "I understand what you're asking and I'm going to be precise about what I share." She respected that. He could tell she respected it because she didn't push. "You'll be in my advanced practical group on Thursday afternoons," she said. "It's technically for third years and above, but I see no reason to leave you in a position where you're not being challenged." Harry nodded. "Thank you, Professor." "Don't thank me. Work." He smiled all the way back to the common room. The letter from Dumbledore arrived on a Wednesday. It was polite and warm and very deliberately casual. "I wonder if you might have tea with me at your convenience. I so enjoy getting to know our new students," and had the specific quality of something that had been carefully revised from an earlier, more direct version. Harry read it twice, put it on his desk, and went to Charms. He told Hermione about it in the library that evening, while they were doing their astronomy reading. Ron was there too, eating a biscuit he'd produced from some pocket dimension of his bag and reading the chess section of a Hogwarts history text with considerably more enthusiasm than the rest of it. "Are you going?" Hermione asked. "Of course." "Nervous?" He gave her the look. She gave him the look back that said she knew full well he wasn't nervous and had asked to see what he'd say. He'd learned this about her in 11 days, she tested, constantly, not maliciously but as a fundamental operating mode. She wanted to know what things were made of. "He wants to take my measure," Harry said. "Let him. He's the most powerful wizard alive," Hermione said, not as a challenge, just as a data point. "By most assessments." "By most assessments within a specific framework," Harry said. "Which is a real thing. I'm not dismissing it." Ron looked up from his chess reading. "What do you think he wants?" Harry had been thinking about this since the letter arrived. "He had a plan for me," he said. "Had it for 10 years. I wasn't where he put me, so the plan needs revising and he wants to see what he's working with before he revises it." "What was the plan?" Hermione asked. "I don't know exactly. But I know the shape of it." He thought about how to say it without it sounding grandiose. "He wrote a letter when I was a year old telling someone I should be placed with people who would contain me. Minimize me. Make sure I grew up without knowing what I was." He said it flatly, without anger, because it was simply information. That was the shape of the plan. A boy who was appropriately humble and appropriately afraid and appropriately grateful to be told who he was and what he was for. Hermione stared at him. "He wanted to manage you. He wanted to protect me," Harry said carefully. "And also manage me." The two things were genuinely simultaneous, which is what makes him complicated rather than simple. He thought making me small would keep me safe. He also thought that a small, frightened boy would be easier to aim. He paused. He was probably right about the second thing and wrong about whether that justified the first. Ron had put down his biscuit. "That's quite cold," he said. "It's not meant to be." He made choices with the information he had and the framework he was using. "I'm not angry with him." Harry picked up his quill. "I just won't let him make those choices for me." Dumbledore's office smelled like books and something sweet and the particular kind of magical warmth that accumulates in spaces used for serious thinking over many decades. It was full of extraordinary things. Harry did a rapid visual inventory as he sat down, filing items of interest, and had, near the desk, a bird that was either a phoenix or a very committed fire hazard. Phoenix, Harry confirmed, meeting the bird's eye. Phoenixes had a quality he recognized, the presence of something that had burned away its own fear so thoroughly that what remained was purely itself. The bird looked back at him and made a small, low sound, almost a question. "Beautiful," Harry said to it, meaning it. "Fawkes is indeed remarkable," Dumbledore said, settling into his chair. He had a particular quality in person that didn't fully transmit at distance. The warmth was real, the intelligence was formidable, and both of them were being deployed simultaneously and consciously, which Harry appreciated as craftsmanship. "And I find he is an excellent judge of character. He seems to like you." "Most fire does," Harry said pleasantly. Dumbledore smiled. Waited to see if Harry would fill the silence. Harry didn't. "I confess," Dumbledore said, "that I had expected to be meeting you several years ago. Under rather different circumstances." "Privet Drive," Harry said. "Privet Drive," Dumbledore agreed. "I had thought it the best place for you. Safe. Hidden. I am, upon reflection, and indeed upon rather significant reflection, not certain I was correct." He folded his hands. "I would very much like to know where you have been, Harry. And who with. And what," he paused. "What you have become." Harry looked at him steadily. The man's eyes were on his, blue and bright and actively working, not trying to read his mind in any magical sense, simply the kind of intense human presence that tries to understand through sustained attention. He deserved honesty, Harry thought, as much honesty as Harry chose to give. "Japan," he said. "With Amaterasu and Susanoo. I expect those names mean something to you." A pause. Something shifted behind Dumbledore's eyes, the rapid internal processing of a very well-read man encountering something unexpected and choosing how to respond to it. "They do," he said, and now the warmth was still there but something had been added to it. Something that might have been, unease, dressed in the clothes of wonder. "The Japanese deities of sun and storm." "Yes. They found you," Dumbledore said, very quietly. "After, the night my parents died." "Yes." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. He picked up a small silver instrument from his desk and turned it in his hands, a thing Harry suspected he did when he wanted something to do with his hands while his mind worked. "And they raised you." "They raised me." "And gave you." "Yes," Harry said simply. The office was quiet except for the soft sound of Fawkes shifting on his perch. Outside the window the sky had gone dark and the first stars were appearing over the forbidden forest. "I owe you an apology, Harry," Dumbledore said. He said it without qualification or caveat, which Harry hadn't quite expected and which cost him some of his certainty about the conversation's direction. "I placed you with people who would not have, who could not have," he stopped. "I thought I was choosing safety. I did not fully consider what else I might be choosing." Harry studied him. The apology was genuine. He could read genuineness very well. Amaterasu had taught him that dishonesty had a texture, like static in a radio signal, and this had none. "You did what you thought was right," he said. "And it didn't happen. So there's no loss to account for, only a plan that didn't get to execute. You're very measured about it." "I had good parents," Harry said. "Different parents than you intended. But very good ones." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. "Then, there are things I need to speak with you about. Things that concern your history and your future and that are, rather urgent, in their way. But I find myself wondering whether you already know them." "The Horcrux," Harry said. The word landed like a stone in still water. Dumbledore went very still. "Amaterasu told me when I was 7, Harry said. The fragment of Voldemort's soul behind my scar. The connection it creates. The reason he isn't properly dead." "She told you?" Dumbledore's voice was careful. She told me everything. She thought I was entitled to understand the terms of my own situation. He met the old man's eyes. I agree with her. A long pause. Dumbledore put down the silver instrument. When he looked at Harry again, something in his expression had changed, the performance of gentle management had dropped slightly, and underneath it was something more honest and slightly more tired, the expression of a man who has been the smartest person in every room for so long that encountering something genuinely outside his map is both disorienting and, apparently, something close to relief. What do you intend? Dumbledore asked. Not rhetorically. An actual question. I intend to be at Hogwarts, Harry said. To learn. To make friends. To do what 11-year-olds should do. He paused. And when the time comes, I intend to address the Voldemort problem properly. But I won't be rushed into it, I won't be frightened into it, and I won't be shaped by someone else's plan for how it should go. He said it without sharpness, without performance. Just fact. I hope that's clear. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then, to Harry's genuine surprise, he smiled, not the managed warmth, but something smaller and more real. Perfectly clear, he said. On the perch, Fawkes made a sound that, in any other context, might have been described as satisfied. The incident in the corridor happened in October, which was when Draco Malfoy made his first real attempt to establish a social order that Harry occupied predictably. It had been building. Malfoy had spent the first weeks of term absorbing the information that Harry Potter was not the narrative he'd expected, not famous and hungry for it, not appropriately awed by Malfoy's own credentials, not available to be positioned as ally or rival in any of the conventional configurations. This evidently bothered him, because conventional configurations were the tools Malfoy had been given and a situation that didn't respond to them left him operating without a map. Harry had watched this process with more sympathy than Malfoy would probably want him to have. The corridor ambush, if it could be called that, it was really more of a very badly strategized social confrontation, happened on a Tuesday evening near the library. Malfoy was with Crabbe and Goyle, who were large in the way that things can be large without any particular purpose behind the largeness, and he'd planted himself in Harry's path with the energy of someone who had prepared a speech. Potter, he said. I've been thinking. Good habit, Harry said, and waited. Malfoy's prepared opening had apparently been designed for several responses, none of which was that one. He reset. You should think about the company you're keeping, he said. Weasley's family is, they haven't got any standing, any real standing, and the Granger girl is Muggle-born, I know, Harry said. So you, Hermione's the most academically capable person in our year, Harry said. Ron is going to be important. I'm not particularly interested in who their families are. Are you planning to make a point? Malfoy's jaw tightened. Crabbe and Goyle shifted in the way large things shift when they're deciding whether the social weather requires them to do something. Harry glanced at them, briefly, evenly, the glance of someone doing a professional assessment, and they stilled. You think you're better than everyone, Malfoy said, and now the prepared speech was gone and there was something more honest underneath it, the genuine friction of someone who has been told they are exceptional their whole life and has just encountered something that doesn't confirm it. No, Harry said. I think I know what I am. There's a difference. And what are you? Harry looked at him for a moment. He considered, genuinely, what the honest answer to that question was and whether giving it here, in this corridor, on a Tuesday in October, served anything. He decided it served something. I'm the person who's going to be here for 7 years, he said, and who would rather spend those years in your company than not, if that company is worth having. But I don't negotiate the terms of my own identity to get it. He paused. Your father has a framework. I understand it. Inside that framework you're quite significant. I'm outside the framework, which means I'm not assessing you by its rules. So if that's your pitch, that I should value your name and your blood status and your family's standing, it won't work because those things have no weight in the system I'm using. Malfoy stared at him. Something worked behind his eyes, something that was actually, genuinely processing rather than just reacting. Harry waited. "What system are you using?" Malfoy asked, and the sharpness had gone from his voice. "I'm deciding what people are worth based on what they actually do and who they actually are," Harry said. "You want to know if you pass?" "I genuinely don't know yet." "You might. But it won't be because of your name." A long pause. Crabbe looked at Goyle. Goyle looked at his shoes. Malfoy collected himself. The habitual composure reassembled, but it sat differently on him now, like clothes that have been put back on too quickly. "I'll remember that," he said. "Good," Harry said. And walked past him. Ron and Hermione were waiting at the library entrance. Ron had watched the whole thing from 30 feet away with the expression of someone who could see several chess pieces moving at once. "That was either very good or very complicated," he said. "Both," Harry said, and pushed the door open. Flying lessons were a revelation. Not for Harry. He'd been moving through open sky in various divine-adjacent ways since he was 6, had an instinctive relationship with air and altitude and the specific physical intelligence of three-dimensional movement. Flying on a broom was different from everything else, because the broom was a tool that extended intention outward rather than a capacity that lived in the body itself, but the underlying relationship with the sky was the same. The revelation was watching Hermione try. She was, apparently, the one discipline where her formidable machinery of preparation and intent ran into something that required a fundamentally different kind of knowing. She could describe the theory of broom flight in precise detail. The broom did not care. On the first attempt, she got 6 feet off the ground and came back down with the expression of someone receiving deeply unwelcome information about the gap between knowing and doing. Harry came back down beside her. "It's not mechanical," he said. "It's not a formula. You have to stop deciding what it's going to do and start feeling what it wants to do." "Brooms don't want things," she said, with the specific frustration of someone whose model is being challenged by evidence. "Not want exactly. But they respond to something that isn't instruction. More like, intention that's relaxed. If you're holding it too tightly, meaning-wise, you're saying I'm overthinking it. I'm saying the thinking needs to happen before you get on. Once you're up, you've got to trust that you've already done the thinking and let your body be where the work happens." She looked at him. Then at her broom. Then up at where the other students were variously succeeding and struggling across the pitch. "Let my body, you run," he said. "You ran here from the castle, I saw you, you were late. When you run, you're not thinking about how your legs work. A beat." She got back on the broom. She was 20 feet up inside 30 seconds, and the look on her face when it stopped being a problem and started being something else, when the fear fell away and the actual sensation of it arrived, was one of the best things Harry had seen since he got to Hogwarts. Ron, flying past them, did a double take at Hermione's altitude and nearly fell off his own broom. Madame Hooch watched Harry from the ground with the expression she'd been wearing since he first kicked off, the expression of someone who can see that they are not watching a student who is learning to fly, they are watching someone to whom flight is simply one more thing they already know. She let it go. There was no rule against already knowing. The class ended well. In the corridor back to the castle, Harry walked alongside Neville Longbottom, who had taken a fall early and was holding his wrist with the careful stillness of someone trying not to show how much it hurt. Harry fell into step beside him. "How is it?" he asked, nodding at the wrist. "Fine," Neville said, with the automatic quality of someone who says fine as a first response to everything. "Neville." A pause. "It really hurts," Neville admitted. "Hospital wing," Harry said. "Now, not later." "I don't want to make a fuss, making a fuss is how broken things get fixed," Harry said. He'd had this from Susanoo: stoicism is only a virtue if the thing you're stoic about doesn't need attending to. "Come on." He walked Neville to the hospital wing, which made them both late for herbology, which McGonagall noted and accepted Harry's explanation for with the expression of someone who is noting a character trait as much as an excuse. The dream came in early November. Harry rarely dreamed with particular intensity, he slept with the deep, clean sleep of someone whose nervous system had been trained to reset properly, but this one came sharp and clear and stayed after he woke. It was dark, and there was a voice that he didn't recognize from any waking context but recognized in some deeper register, the way you recognize a smell that returns you instantly to a specific time. The voice was a man's voice, thin and cold and deeply, fundamentally convinced of its own primacy. It was talking to someone. Giving instructions. The words weren't clear. The quality was, the quality of a will that had been refined by obsession until everything soft had burned away and only ambition remained, moving in the dark and certain that it was moving towards something rather than away from everything it had surrendered. Harry sat up. He reached up and touched the scar on his forehead, which was warm, not the sharp pain he'd read about in the books, just a warmth, a proximity, the way a compass needle moves when you bring a magnet near it. Quarrel, he thought. He didn't act on it immediately. That was the training: identify the thing, understand the thing, do not react to the thing before you understand it fully. He lay back down and thought carefully and systematically about what he knew and what he suspected and what those two categories implied. Voldemort was not dead. He was alive in some reduced, partial sense, anchored to existence by the Horcruxes, one of which was sitting behind Harry's scar. He needed resources. He needed a physical means of operation. Quirrell was performing nervousness over something, and the something, Harry was now fairly confident, was the presence of something that was using him. There was also the third-floor corridor. He'd known about it since the start of term. The warning at the welcome feast had been specific enough that several people had tested the door, which was locked with what Harry could feel from several feet away was a serious ward sequence. Someone had put something there. Someone was concerned about it being accessed. He thought about Dumbledore. About the vault at Gringotts that had been emptied the day he and Amaterasu had been in Diagon Alley. He'd read the headline in the Prophet, attempted break-in at Gringotts. He thought about the large three-headed dog he'd caught a glimpse of through the door in September when it briefly and terrifyingly opened before he closed it again. He thought about Dumbledore's question in the office, "What do you intend?" and the particular tenor of it, the sense of someone checking where the pieces on a board had moved to. Something was in the third-floor corridor. Someone wanted it. And the someone wanting it was using Quirrell. He thought about telling Dumbledore. Decided against it for now. He had the same information Dumbledore already had, he suspected, and Dumbledore's response was to observe rather than intervene, which meant any intervention Harry made would run into Dumbledore's observation. He thought about telling Hermione and Ron, and decided yes, because they were his and he didn't keep things from people who deserved to know them. He wrote to Amaterasu instead, a brief letter that was mostly a report rather than a request, the way she'd always taught him to communicate: "Here is what I know, here is what I think, here is my assessment, here is my plan." He let Kaze out the dormitory window into the cold November dark and watched the owl angle up into the sky and vanish. Then he wrote to Susanoo, which was a shorter letter, something on the third floor that someone wants to steal and another someone is protecting. Voldemort adjacent. I'm monitoring. Thought you'd want to know. Susanoo's reply arrived the next morning, which was a record even for divine correspondence. It read, "Watch your back. Hit first if it comes to that. I mean that. Love, Susanoo. P.S. Your sister says the scar warmth is the sole fragment responding to proximity. Keep track of when it happens and where." Harry stared at the letter. "Sister," he said. He turned the letter over. On the back, in a different and much more elegant handwriting, "Amaterasu says your sister is the sun. She is not wrong. Tsukuyomi. The god of the moon," Harry thought. Of course. He added this to his mental map of the situation and went to breakfast. The argument with Snape happened the second week of November, and it was not what anyone in the room expected. Potions was Snape's domain in the complete sense: the dungeons, the atmosphere, the particular social architecture of a classroom managed through selective intimidation and the strategic deployment of contempt. Harry had sat through 9 weeks of it with the calm attention he brought to everything, doing the work carefully and well, watching Snape's pedagogical style with the same interest he brought to any complex system. Snape had a pattern. He introduced concepts with precision that Harry genuinely respected. The man understood potion-making deeply, at the level of principle rather than just recipe, and then used the question-asking as a tool of social management, targeting uncertainty and rewarding it with humiliation. Harry had noticed he avoided asking Harry direct questions in class, which he suspected was partly caution and partly the specific frustration of a teacher whose intimidation methodology requires a student to be intimidatable. On this particular Thursday, Snape was moving through the class during a brewing exercise and stopped at Harry's cauldron. The potion was correct. Snape stared at it. "You've substituted the powdered bicorn horn," he said. "Added it at a different stage," Harry said. "Stage 4 instead of 6. The ingredients interact differently with the base, the heat integration is more complete and the final stability is higher. That's not the method in the text." "The text's method works," Harry said. "This method works better. You deviated from established instructions." "I improved on them," Harry said, "without heat. If you'd like I can demonstrate the difference in outcome. The finished potency should be measurably higher." The dungeon was very quiet. 20 students had stopped breathing with the specific held-breath quality of people watching something they're not sure will end well. Hermione, 2 cauldrons away, had her eyes fixed on her own work with the expression of someone who is listening very hard while appearing to do no such thing. Snape looked at Harry for a long moment. The thing about Snape, Harry had decided, was that his contempt was not indiscriminate, it was, underneath everything, a quality that lived adjacent to very high standards, the specific frustration of a brilliant person who has spent years watching mediocrity dress itself up as adequacy. He was waiting, Harry thought, for evidence one way or the other. "Test it," Snape said. Harry tested it. The result was what he'd said it would be. Snape looked at the result. Looked at Harry. 5 points to Gryffindor, he said, in the tone of someone doing something against their aesthetic preferences. "Write up the methodology differences. I want to see your reasoning in full." He moved on. Hermione caught Harry's eye across the cauldrons. Her expression said she was simultaneously impressed and slightly aggravated that it had been that easy, which was very Hermione. After class, in the corridor, Ron said, "You know he's going to spend the next 2 weeks looking for something to dock points for." "Probably," Harry agreed. Was it worth it? Harry thought about it. He needed to know I wasn't going to pretend to know less than I do to make him comfortable. Now he knows. That's useful for both of us. Ron looked at him. "You approach everything like it's a diplomatic situation." "Amaterasu," Harry said simply, by way of full explanation. Ron nodded. By this point Amaterasu and Susanoo as explanations for Harry's various qualities had become shorthand between them, efficient, affectionate, containing whole philosophies in a single word. Ron had started saying very Susanoo when Harry did something with the forward, uncompromising energy of someone who has decided that a situation requires direct action. He said it now about the Snape thing, and Harry laughed, and they went to dinner. November ended wet and cold and full of Quidditch. Harry had been put on the Gryffindor team in the 3rd week of term, in circumstances that McGonagall described as unprecedented and Oliver would describe as the answer to 3 years of prayer. He played seeker with the natural ease of someone who had been spending quality time in open sky since he could walk, and at the first practice he'd caught the practice snitch 7 times in a row before would remember to close his mouth. He liked Quidditch for a simple reason: it was the one context at Hogwarts where thinking was genuinely secondary to being, where the body's knowledge was the relevant knowledge and the mind's job was to get out of the way. He was fast in the air, not supernaturally fast, simply fast the way something is fast when it moves without hesitation, when there's no fraction of a second lost to self-monitoring or doubt. On the last day of November, coming back from evening practice in the gathering dark with a broomstick over his shoulder and the cold clean air still in his lungs, he looked up at the sky. Cloud cover, mostly, but a gap moving through, and for a moment, through the gap, stars. He stopped walking. He stood in the middle of the Hogwarts grounds with his broom over his shoulder and looked up at the stars, and felt, just for a moment, just in this specific interval between practice ending and dinner beginning, the full, clean weight of where he was and what he was doing and who he was while he did it. He was Harry Potter. He was 11 years old. He was at school and he had friends and a team and classes that challenged him and a castle full of mysteries and a divine family far away who loved him and would come if he needed them, but he did not need them. He was absolutely and specifically fine on his own 2 feet on this cold Scottish ground with the stars coming out overhead and dinner waiting inside. The gap in the clouds closed. He went in. Chapter 4, The Mirror Doesn't Lie. The troll smelled like something had died inside something that had also died, and then both things had been left in a warm room for several weeks. Harry was aware of this primarily because he was standing approximately 8 feet from it, which was close enough that the smell was essentially its own weather system. The troll was in the second-floor girls' bathroom, which it had found by the apparent method of walking through walls until it encountered plumbing, and it was doing the specific kind of damage that comes from something very large and very stupid being in a space designed for something very small and very intentional. Sinks were rubble. 2 stalls were matchsticks. The troll's club, a thing the size of a small tree, which it was swinging with the enthusiasm of something that has recently discovered cause and effect, had taken out most of the far wall. Hermione was backed against the remnants of the wall, which was not ideal. Harry had come in 30 seconds ahead of Ron, who had come in 30 seconds behind Harry because Harry had heard Hermione's voice through the rubble and stopped thinking about anything except getting to it. There had been a point, approximately 20 seconds ago, when he could have gone for a teacher. He'd assessed that and discarded it in the time it took to push the bathroom door open, because 20 seconds was a long time when something the size of a car was swinging a tree trunk at your friend. The troll turned when he came in. It had small, wet eyes that moved slowly, and they moved over Harry with the evaluation of something that operates primarily on size comparison. Harry was 11. The troll was 12 feet tall. The troll made a decision about the relevance of Harry based on this data and turned back toward Hermione. Harry held up one hand. The light that came out of it was not the gentle, warm sunrise quality light he used when he was being measured and deliberate. It was the other kind, the full, unmediated sun at solar noon, concentrated, the kind that makes you understand on a cellular level why ancient people built temples to it. It hit the troll directly and the troll made a sound that was equal parts confusion and pain and staggered backward 3 steps, which put it against the opposite wall. Harry walked forward. Harry, Hermione started. I've got it, he said, calmly. The troll swung its club. He sidestepped it with the unhurried efficiency of someone to whom physical threat is primarily a geometry problem, caught the backswing of the club's momentum, and put one hand flat on the troll's wrist. Not aggressively, precisely. The warmth that radiated from his palm was the specific warmth of something that has decided to communicate rather than destroy, and it moved up the troll's arm and into its nervous system with the directness of sunlight moving through water. The troll sat down. Very suddenly, very heavily, like a building deciding to reconsider its structural commitments. It sat on the bathroom floor with an expression of bovine confusion and showed no particular interest in getting back up. Ron appeared in the doorway. He looked at Harry. Looked at the troll. Looked at Hermione. Looked at the rubble. Processed all of this. Right, he said. Okay. Harry turned around. Hermione was pressed against the wall and she was pale and her bushy hair was full of plaster dust and she was looking at him with an expression that combined several things: relief, residual fear, the rapidly receding shock of recent mortal peril, and underneath all of it, the expression of someone cataloging something carefully for future reference. Are you hurt? He asked. No, she said, which was almost entirely true. She pushed off the wall and stood up straight and looked at the troll with the expression someone makes when they are deciding to be fine about something. Is it? What did you do to it? Told its nervous system it was tired, Harry said. It'll be fine in an hour. You, with your hand, yes. She looked at his hand. Looked at him. You did magic without your wand. Yes. A pause. I've seen you do that before. In small ways. She was pulling plaster out of her hair and her voice had taken on the specific quality of someone who is doing something routine with their hands so their brain can work. But that was less small, he agreed. Ron came fully into the bathroom and looked at the troll with genuine interest. Is it asleep? Is it safe to? Don't poke it, Harry said. I wasn't going to poke it. He absolutely was going to poke it. The sound of running feet in the corridor, Professors Quirrell, McGonagall, and Snape arriving in the order of their proximity to the bathroom and their respective commitment to urgency. Quirrell made a strangled sound upon seeing the troll seated and docile on the bathroom floor. Snape looked at the devastation with the expression of someone calculating the administrative implications. McGonagall looked at the three students and then at the troll and then at Harry specifically with the expression of someone connecting information she'd been accumulating for 2 months. She opened her mouth. He was sitting down when we got here, Ron said. He said it with such immediate and absolute confidence that it took Harry a moment to catch up with what Ron was doing, choosing, quickly and strategically, to give Harry the option of not having this particular conversation right now, in front of Snape, in a destroyed bathroom. Harry looked at Ron. Ron looked back with the face of someone who has made a chess move and is waiting to see if it was the right one. The troll was all ready, Hermione began, then caught Harry's slight headshake and pivoted without breaking stride, the fast adaptability of someone whose mind moves quickly. We were just trying to stay out of its way until someone came. McGonagall looked at all three of them with the expression of someone who is deciding how much of the truth she already knows and how much of what she's being told she will accept for the moment. 5 points to each of you, she said, for the exceptionally dangerous exercise of not being killed. She looked at the troll. At Harry. Mr. Potter, I'd like a word later. Of course, Professor, he said. Snape had been looking at his ankle, Harry noticed. At the door, just before the professors left, Snape turned back, and there was something on his face for one moment, not the contempt, not the management. Something else, some old and complicated thing that moved through his expression like weather and was gone before it could be named. In the corridor afterward, walking back toward the common room, Hermione grabbed Harry's arm. You didn't want them to know, she said. Not an accusation. An observation, genuinely curious. I didn't want to spend the rest of the year being an administrative incident, Harry said. There's a difference between not hiding what I am and making every incident into a formal event. Ron nodded. Smart. Hermione thought about it and arrived somewhere that was not full agreement but accepted the logic. Next time warn me, she said, so I can adjust my story more smoothly. Harry looked at her. You lied to a professor, he said. To protect me. I didn't lie, I redirected. She paused. Well. I did lie a bit. She said it with the expression of someone who has violated a personal code and is surprised to find they don't entirely regret it. Don't make it a habit. The three of them walked the rest of the way in comfortable silence, which was, Harry thought, the specific texture of friendship that had arrived at the next stage, past the getting to know you part and into the territory where you'd done something difficult together and come out the other side still talking. McGonagall's later conversation was brief and to the point, which was her mode. The troll did not sit down on its own, she said. No, Harry agreed. What did you do? He told her. She listened without interrupting, which was the thing about McGonagall. She asked questions and then actually waited for the answers rather than using the question as a delivery system for her own conclusions. You channeled solar energy through direct physical contact, she said. Essentially. Into the troll's nervous system. Yes. She looked at him over her spectacles. It doesn't resemble any school of magic I am familiar with. It's not, Harry said. It's different. They overlap, the wizarding tradition and what I was taught, in some ways. In others they're working from completely different assumptions. Can I ask what those assumptions are? He liked her for asking rather than telling. Wizarding magic externalizes will through a medium, wand, word, gesture. What Amaterasu and Susanoo taught me is more direct. Will becomes the medium. The wand tradition is a conversation between person and world. The divine tradition is more like, becoming part of the world's own process and redirecting it from the inside. McGonagall was quiet for a moment. Outside her window the grounds were dark and wet and somewhere a wind had picked up. That's an interesting framework, she said, in the tone of someone adding something to a mental library. Be careful about overextending in direct applications. The castle has its own magical architecture and unknown interactions are unpredictable. I know, he said. I was precise tonight. You were, she agreed. 10 points to Gryffindor. For the actual reason. He walked back to Gryffindor Tower feeling, all things considered, that the evening had resolved well. December arrived with the committed brutality of a Scottish winter and the castle transformed itself in the way of something that has been waiting for the season all year. Garlands appeared. Trees materialized in common rooms. Peeves developed a mistletoe-related antisocial campaign that required navigating the corridors with the evasive footwork of a professional. The smell of cinnamon and wood smoke moved through the castle like a rumor. Most students were going home for Christmas. Ron was going home. Harry was not, because home was Japan and that was a long way, and also because the castle had been telling him something for the past 3 weeks that he hadn't quite been able to make out yet, and he thought the quiet of a near-empty building might let him hear it more clearly. Hermione was going home to her parents. She told him this at breakfast on the second-to-last day of term with the tone of someone explaining something they've thought carefully about. My parents haven't seen me since September, she said. They're not, they understand, about magic, they've always been brilliant about it. But I think seeing them is important. Of course it is, Harry said. You're not going anywhere. Here's interesting. She looked at him with the expression she wore when she thought he was being braver about something than was strictly necessary, which was an expression Harry had come to recognize and generally disagreed with. Will you be all right? Hermione, he said. I grew up with a sun goddess. That's not what I'm asking and you know it. He met her eyes. She was asking whether he would be lonely, and she was asking it with the directness she brought to everything and the genuine concern that she usually kept briskly contained because she'd been taught that directness and sentiment were things you rationed carefully. He appreciated the question for the same reason he appreciated everything about Hermione. She asked what she actually meant. I'll be fine, he said. And I mean that without deflection. She held his gaze for a moment, then nodded, and went back to her toast. Ron, departing, left Harry with a box of Weasley's Wizard Wheezes prototypes that his brothers had sent and which Ron deemed too unpredictable to take home, a hand-drawn map of the castle's lesser-known passages that was partly inherited from his brothers and partly his own additions, and a note that said, "Don't do anything excellent without me." Harry put the note on his desk and looked at it for a moment. He wrote back, "No promises." Christmas morning brought presents, which surprised him. He hadn't expected anyone to send him things, which was perhaps naive given that he'd now been visibly present in the wizarding world for several months. There was a box from the Weasley family that contained a hand-knitted jumper in deep blue and a card signed by the entire family including all the older brothers and his mother, which Harry stared at for a moment before setting down carefully. There was a package from Hermione containing a book on advanced magical theory and a note that said in case you run out of things to think about, which he found completely accurate. There was a box from Neville, unexpectedly, with a small plant that apparently had calming properties when kept near a sleeping area, which was both thoughtful and specific enough that Harry revised his understanding of Neville upward. And there was a package with no note, wrapped in brown paper, containing something that fell out of the wrapping with the silence of something that didn't quite fall in the usual sense, it pooled. He looked at it. An invisibility cloak. He ran it through his hands. It had a quality he'd encountered before in divine objects, not enchanted in the wizarding sense, not imbued through any human process, but made with the specific investment of something that had actual will behind it. He could feel the difference the way you feel the difference between a photograph of a flame and an actual flame. He looked at the blank card that had come with it. Nothing. No name. No message. He put it on and looked at himself in the mirror above his dresser. The mirror showed the room without him. He stood in the absence of himself in a mirror for a long moment and felt something that was not what you'd expect, not sinister, not unsettling, but interesting. He was still himself, fully, completely, with all that entailed. The fact that the mirror couldn't see him didn't change anything that was actually real. He took it off and put it in his trunk. He spent Christmas Day in the castle's quieter rooms, moving through the library, through a corridor of portraits who were mostly bored and delighted by the company, through a section of the 6th floor that Ron's map described as "Don't ask, just go there," which turned out to contain a room full of the most comfortable chairs Harry had ever encountered and a fire that needed no tending. He spent 2 hours there with a book and the fire and the snow coming down outside the windows and thought that this was, in its specific and unrepeatable way, a perfect day. He found the mirror of Eriste by following the feeling. It wasn't magical compulsion, nothing like that. It was more that the castle had been telling him something for weeks, and the further into the quiet of a nearly empty Hogwarts he went, the clearer the telling became. A direction. A specificity. The hum of something behind a door that he hadn't seen before, which was interesting because by now he thought he'd been in most of the relevant doors. The door was in a corridor off the 4th floor that the map marked with Ron's note. "Quirrell went this way twice in October, make of that what you will." Harry filed the coincidence of that and pushed the door open. The room was empty except for the mirror. It was tall, taller than any mirror needed to be for practical purposes, and ornate, with elaborate gold framing and an inscription along the top that Harry read backwards without much effort: "I show not your face but your heart's desire." He stood in front of it and looked. His parents looked back. He hadn't expected to be hit as hard as he was. This was the thing about being well prepared: you could understand a thing fully in intellectual terms and still not know what it felt like until it arrived. He'd known about the mirror. He'd read Dumbledore's account of it in one of the library texts on magical artifacts. He understood the mechanism. And none of that, not one word of any of it, had prepared him for the way his mother's face looked in the mirror, the red hair, the exact green of his own eyes, the expression that he had no reference for because he'd never actually seen it and yet recognized it immediately, with a certainty that had nothing to do with knowledge and everything to do with something that ran much deeper. Beside her, his father. Tall, dark-haired, spectacles, with the specific easy confidence of someone who never quite believed that bad things would happen to good people and turned out to be catastrophically wrong about that and died anyway without giving up the belief. James Potter was grinning in the mirror. It was not a grin Harry had seen before. It was directed at him. Harry looked at the mirror for a long time. He did not cry, which was not because he was suppressing it but because what he felt was not grief in the familiar configuration. It was something more complex, the meeting of absence and presence simultaneously, the specific kind of love you can have for people you never knew that is neither less real nor less deep than love built on actual experience. Lily and James Potter existed in him as origin and loss and context and inheritance, and the mirror was showing him that they also existed as want. As the thing he hadn't known he was reaching toward until it was reflected back at him. He looked away. Looked back. Looked away. Then he sat down on the floor in front of the mirror, because his legs had made the decision before his mind caught up, and he sat there in the empty room with the fire less cold of it and breathed. He was there for perhaps 20 minutes before he heard the door. Dumbledore entered with the quiet step of someone who has known for some time that this was happening and has chosen the moment of intervention carefully. He crossed the room and sat down on the floor beside Harry without comment, which Harry had not expected, and for a moment they simply sat together in front of the mirror. "Your parents," Dumbledore said. Not a question. "Yes," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at the mirror. In it, Harry glanced sideways and caught the edge of whatever Dumbledore saw. The headmaster's expression was one of great age and greater longing and a particular kind of pain that Harry recognized as the pain of someone whose regrets have been with them long enough to have made a home. He looked away from it quickly, feeling that whatever Dumbledore saw was not his to witness. I should move this, Dumbledore said, half to himself. I have moved it twice already and twice found reason to leave it. He paused. It has a way of making itself seem necessary. It's not dangerous, Harry said. Or it isn't to me. I know what I'm looking at. Many people know what they're looking at and cannot look away regardless. Harry thought about that. I think it depends on whether you know the difference between wanting something and needing it to be in front of you. He looked at the mirror again, his parents, still there, still looking at him with the specific warmth of something that could not be touched. I want them to be real. But they're real in the way they're real, in me, in what I am, in what they made before I was born. This, he meant the mirror. This is a beautiful lie. I can appreciate it without living in it. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. You are not, he said eventually, what I expected. You've said something like that before. I mean it differently now. He looked at Harry with the full weight of his attention, which was considerable, the full, unsimplified attention of a man who had spent decades being the most significant presence in every room. When I placed you with the Dursleys, I believed, I had convinced myself, that hardship would make you humble and humble would make you safe and safe would make you available to be the person the prophecy required. It is one of the great arrogances of my life. He paused. What Amaterasu and Susanoo gave you instead was something I could not have planned for. What did they give me? Harry asked, genuinely curious what Dumbledore would say. Groundedness, Dumbledore said, after a moment. True groundedness. Not the performed groundedness of someone who has been made small, which is what I was planning. The real kind. The kind that comes from knowing precisely what you are and finding it sufficient. He looked at the mirror. You sat in front of this and felt what it was asking you to feel, and you will stand up and leave and it will not follow you. Harry looked at the mirror one more time. His mother and father. His real parents, who had loved him and died for him and left him in the world to figure out what to do with the life they bought him at cost of their own. Thank you, he said to them, in the mirror. Not performing. Not for Dumbledore. Just finishing something that needed finishing. He stood up. Dumbledore stood beside him. There is something on the third floor, Harry said. The Philosopher's Stone. Another careful pause from Dumbledore. You know that. I've known since October. Quirrell is working for Voldemort and he's trying to get it. He said it flatly. You know this too. I am monitoring the situation, Dumbledore said, with the careful phrasing of someone choosing words deliberately. You're letting it develop, Harry said. You want it to come to a head here where you can see it. Dumbledore did not confirm or deny this, which was its own confirmation. The trap in the third floor, Harry said. The protections. Were some of them designed to require specific knowledge or qualities to get through? They were designed by the staff, Dumbledore said. Each contributed a challenge suited to their particular expertise. So they're learnable, Harry said. In principle. In principle. Harry nodded. He was building the map. Not for now, for when. If something goes wrong, he said, I won't wait for permission to act. Dumbledore looked at him. The half-moon glasses caught the dim light of the room. No, he said. I imagine you won't. Harry left the mirror behind. In the corridor he paused for one moment, feeling the castle hum around him, that deep layered resonance of stone and magic and time, and then he walked back toward the inhabited part of the building. January returned the school to itself, and returned Ron and Hermione to Harry, which was better than he'd expected it to feel. Ron arrived back loud and full of food and immediately lost a chess match to Harry for the first time in their acquaintance, which he took as evidence that something had gone wrong with the chess set rather than as a reflection on anything skill-related. Harry didn't argue with this interpretation. Hermione arrived early, the first day back, train arriving midday, and came directly to the common room with her bag still over her shoulder and reported immediately on a theoretical inconsistency in the potions textbook that she'd been thinking about over the holiday. Harry had thought about the same inconsistency. They spent 3 hours at the library table working through it. Ron watched them doing this and said, "You know, I spent Christmas with my family. Talking. Eating. Doing normal human things. And?" Hermione said. "And it was great and I recommend it highly." "We're doing something similar," Harry said. "You're doing whatever this is," Ron said, waving at the papers. "This is how we're happy," Hermione said simply. Ron considered this. "Fair enough," he said, and got out his chessboard. The three of them had arrived, without formal discussion, at the specific configuration that would probably define the rest of their years at Hogwarts, Harry as the center of gravity, the fixed point around which things organized, Hermione as the forward edge, always moving toward the next hard thing, Ron as the warm, honest ground beneath all of it, the person who made sure neither of the other two forgot what they were and what they were for. They didn't talk about it. It simply was. Quidditch against Slytherin happened on a cold January Saturday and it was, from Harry's perspective, straightforward. He found the snitch 6 minutes in and ended the game before most of the crowd had finished their warming charms. Wood looked torn between delight at the win and grief at missing the full game experience he'd been planning in his head for weeks. Harry thought but did not say that strategic efficiency was its own kind of game experience. Afterward, in the Quidditch changing rooms, Flint, Slytherin captain, with the energy of someone who had been prepared for a longer game and had nowhere to put the aggression, made a remark in Harry's direction about the legitimacy of the snitch catch. Harry looked at him. "It was legitimate," he said. "You're welcome to check with Madam Hooch. Convenient that Gryffindor's seeker happens to be the person who caught the snitch?" Harry said pleasantly. "Yes. That's generally how Quidditch works." Flint's jaw worked. Around him, several Slytherin players made the specific social calculation of whether this was worth pursuing and arrived at no. They left. Oliver Wood clapped Harry on the back. "You know, I've never actually seen someone shut down Marcus Flint with good manners," he said. "It's the least interesting possible way to win that kind of argument," Harry said. "Which is why it works." The Quidditch match in February was the one that mattered. Not because of the score. Because in the 3rd minute, Harry's broom started behaving as if it had developed opinions about where it was going, which was not one of Broom's standard characteristics. He held on, the physical ease of someone who has spent time in actual storms and finds a rebellious broom significantly less threatening than the relevant comparison point, while he assessed the situation. Jinx. Someone was jinxing his broom from the stands. He could feel the interference, a targeted magical signature threading through the enchantment of the broom, trying to establish control. He tightened his physical grip, separated his intention from the broom's enchantment, and looked at the stands. He found the source in 3 seconds. He was looking for the specific quality of concentrated hostile intent, and it was easy to see because it was burning like a lamp in his peripheral awareness, Quirrell, in the teacher's section, not even well concealed in his direction of focus. Harry felt the warmth behind his scar spike. Not pain. Proximity. He made a decision in approximately 1 second and then executed it without drama, separated his own magical signature cleanly from the broom's enchantment, which broke the jinx's purchase, and flew straight at the snitch that he'd been tracking since the 2nd minute. The broom responded the way it was supposed to. The snitch went into his hand. He landed. In the stands, Hermione was still burning a small, very focused fire she'd set at the hem of what she'd assumed was Snape's robes. He'd noticed that too. She'd done it to break what she'd identified as a concentration-disrupting proximity technique, which was wrong about the source but right about the principle and genuinely impressive for a first year. He caught her eye and shook his head slightly. Later, in the common room, the three of them sat in the corner by the fire while the rest of Gryffindor celebrated. "It was Quirrell," Harry said. Hermione stared at him. "But Snape was trying to counter the jinx," Harry said. "He saw it too. He doesn't know it was Quirrell, or he suspects but doesn't have confirmation, but he was working against it, not for it." Ron processed this. So Snape was, helping you? Apparently. Why would he? I don't know, Harry said. His motivations are complex. But the data says what it says. Hermione was quiet for a moment, and Harry could see her revising several things simultaneously. What does this mean for the stone? She said. It means Quirrell's getting more direct, Harry said. Which means the timeline is moving. He looked at the fire. Something is going to happen before the end of term. What do we do? Ron said. Harry looked at his two friends. Ron with his direct, ready attention, already working out positions and contingencies. Hermione with her precise, formidable intelligence, already assembling the facts into a structure. He thought about what Dumbledore was doing and what Quirrell was planning and what the stone was and what Voldemort wanted and what happened if any of those things collided badly. We keep watching, he said. We keep learning. And we get ready. Ready for what specifically? Hermione asked. Whatever they're going to throw at us. He said it without drama, without false confidence. Just as a simple statement of fact. We'll be ready. Ron nodded. Hermione nodded. Outside the common room window the Scottish night pressed against the glass and inside the fire burned and the castle hummed its ancient hum and 3 11-year-olds decided together, without quite naming it, that they were going to face whatever came next and they were going to do it together. March arrived and with it the specific pressure of something building toward an event. Quirrell was worse. Not obviously, not in ways that anyone who wasn't looking closely would catch, but the inventory his eyes ran on every room he entered had become faster and more urgent, and the smell of garlic had, very subtly, changed character. It had moved from precautionary to something that Harry identified, after a moment of thought, as masking. Something was being masked. Something that was increasingly difficult to mask. Harry sent a letter to Amaterasu that was slightly longer and more detailed than his previous ones. He reported everything, the broom incident, Quirrell's deterioration, his assessment of the timeline, the status of the stone's protections as he understood them, the fact that Dumbledore knew and was choosing to let it develop. Amaterasu's reply came in 2 days. It was brief. You have everything you need. Trust your training and trust yourself. If the situation requires action, act. We are watching from here. We will come if it is necessary. It will not be necessary. A pause that existed somehow even in written correspondence. I am proud of you. Your father is insufferable with pride and is trying not to show it, which means he is telling the rain to do your name in lightning and denying it. I love you. Be well. Harry sat with the letter for a long time. Then he folded it carefully and put it with the other letters in the drawer of his bedside table, which was where he kept things that needed to be kept close. April produced something no one expected, which was Draco Malfoy sitting down at the Gryffindor table at breakfast. Not beside Harry. Several seats away, next to a Gryffindor second year named Liam who had the look of someone who had absolutely no idea what the social protocol for this was. Malfoy had a piece of toast and an expression of studied nonchalance that was covering a social maneuver Harry had been watching him work up to for several weeks. He was watching the three of them. Harry, Hermione, Ron. Watching what they were, the specific quality of their interaction, the way the table around them had a different energy than the tables around other first-year groups. And he had decided to test, in his way, whether the thing Harry had said in the corridor in October was real or performance. Harry, without making a big thing of it, moved his pumpkin juice 2 feet down the table and looked at Malfoy. Malfoy looked back with the careful, managed expression of someone who is ready to retreat if required. There's a free seat, Harry said. A pause. Malfoy moved down the table and sat. Ron looked at Harry. Harry looked at Ron. Hermione looked at both of them and then at Malfoy and began, briskly, to do the social heavy lifting of making a conversation happen, which she was surprisingly good at when she decided it was worth the effort. They talked for 20 minutes. It was not comfortable, exactly, there was too much history and too many divergent assumptions for it to be comfortable. But it was honest, in the specific way that things are honest when both parties have decided that performance is more expensive than truth. By the time it ended, Malfoy had made no declarations and Ron had made no speeches, and nothing had been resolved except perhaps the preliminary understanding that resolution was possible. Harry watched Malfoy walk back to the Slytherin table and said nothing. Some things needed space to develop on their own terms. He understood that from Amaterasu, who had been watching humans develop on their own terms since before the concept of terms existed. Ron, beside him, said, "Was that as complicated as it looked?" "More," Harry said. "But good complicated?" Harry watched Malfoy sit down among his own, and the habitual composure reassembling itself, the performed certainty of someone going back to a role, and the way that even in the reassembly there was something different, something that had been slightly rearranged. "Yes," he said. "Good complicated." Outside the great hall windows the spring sky was coming up full and clear, the specific sharp blue of Scottish April that made everything look newly defined, like the world had been cleaned overnight. Harry finished his breakfast and gathered his bag and went to his first class of the day, and the castle hummed underfoot, and everything was building towards something, and Harry was ready. Chapter 5, What Gods Do Not Forgive. The trapdoor was not difficult to find. Harry had known its location since October, known the specific magical resonance of something very large and very alive sitting on top of it, and known in the abstract that there would come a night when the trapdoor mattered in a way that required him to go through it rather than past it. That night arrived on a Thursday in June, announced not by any dramatic signal but by the simple convergence of things he'd been tracking for weeks arriving simultaneously at a point where waiting was no longer the right response. It started with Neville. Neville Longbottom had been, over the course of the year, a person Harry had watched become more himself in the specific incremental way that happens when someone who has been told they are inadequate for long enough to half believe it encounters evidence to the contrary. He was bad at potions and terrible at flying and had a gift for herbology that Sprout described to McGonagall, within Harry's hearing, as generational. He was also brave in the specific, quiet, unglamorous way of someone who is afraid of things and does them anyway, which Harry considered the only kind of bravery that meant anything. What Neville did on Thursday evening was plant himself in the portrait hole with his arms out and tell Harry, Ron, and Hermione that he wouldn't let them out. "I know you're going to do something," he said. His voice shook slightly but his arms did not lower. "I don't know what, but I've seen you planning, and I know it's dangerous, and I can't let you go." He swallowed. "Gryffindor isn't just about being brave when it's easy." Harry stopped in front of him. He looked at Neville, round-faced, slightly damp with the effort of the confrontation, deeply afraid of getting this wrong but doing it anyway. Something in his chest settled. "You're right," he said. "Gryffindor isn't." Neville blinked. He'd clearly prepared for several responses and this wasn't among them. "You're the bravest person in this room right now," Harry said, meaning it completely. "Standing up to us takes more than going where we're going." He paused. "But Neville, Quirrell is going through that trapdoor tonight. There's something down there that Voldemort wants, and if he gets it, people die. Not abstractly. Specifically." Neville's arms dropped slightly. "Not lowering, reconfiguring." "I'm not going to ask you to come," Harry said. "I'm not asking you to move either. I'm telling you what's true, and I trust you to make the right decision with it." A long pause. The portrait hole was quiet. In the fire behind them the common room was empty, everyone else was in bed. Neville stepped aside. "Be careful," he said, with the specific directness of someone who has stopped trying to perform and is just speaking. "We will," Hermione said, and her hand briefly touched Neville's arm, and then they were through. The third-floor corridor was unlocked. Not broken open, unlocked, the ward sequence dissolved from inside, which told Harry everything he needed to know about the timeline. He pushed the door open without ceremony. The large dog, 3 heads, enormous, carrying the specific resentful energy of something that had been put here for a purpose and found the purpose insulting, was asleep. Something small and green sat wilting beside it, a harp, still vibrating with the end of a spell. Quirrell charmed it to sleep, Ron said quietly. Recently, Hermione added. The charm's still active but deteriorating. Harry looked at the trapdoor beneath the dog's paw. He reached out, not with his hands but with the specific awareness he used for understanding the shape of things, and felt the sequence of protections below, layered, one beneath the other, each one someone's best idea of a barrier. He could feel McGonagall's work, precise and rigorous. Sprouts, which was alive in the literal sense. Flitwick's, which was elegant. And deeper, further, something he didn't recognize that had a different quality entirely, older, more personal, bearing the specific signature of someone who had loved one person catastrophically and built their protection around that love without naming it. Snape's, he thought. That's Snape's protection. I'm going first, Harry said. Obviously, Ron said. When I'm down, Ron, you and Hermione, I want you both to listen to me. He looked at them. The corridor was dark except for the ambient glow that gathered around Harry when he wasn't specifically suppressing it, a warmth without source that had been present since he arrived at Hogwarts and that people had stopped noticing after the first month because it was simply what Harry was. I don't know what's down there in terms of Quirrell's current state. If Voldemort is active in him, that's a different situation than a possessed professor. I need you behind me and I need you to do exactly what I say when I say it. Not because I'm doubting either of you. Because the thing at the bottom of this might be beyond what 11-year-olds should meet head-on. You're 11 too, Hermione said. I'm 11 and I'm also something else, he said. Not arrogantly. Just as a fact that the situation required him to name clearly. You're brilliant and you're brave and I need you with me. But if I tell you to run, you run. Ron looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at Ron. Some wordless communication passed between them that Harry had been watching develop all year, the specific shorthand of two people who have been in enough situations together that whole conversations happen in a glance. Agreed, Hermione said. Right, Ron said. Harry opened the trapdoor and dropped. The devil's snare reached for him immediately, all eager tendrils and the specific territorial enthusiasm of a plant that has been given one instruction and is very committed to it. Harry let it reach. It wrapped around his arms, his torso, finding purchase with the confident grip of something that has subdued a lot of things this way. Then the warmth came. Not aggressive, instructive. Plant cells responding to the signal of sunlight, the biological imperative that lives in every green thing, the thing that makes sunflowers turn and vines climb toward windows. The snare loosened. Didn't die, just let go, slowly, with the ambient confusion of something receiving contradictory information from its own body. Harry dropped through to the next chamber. Above him he heard Hermione's voice, sharp, fast, the incantation for Lumos at its maximum, and the rustle of Ron coming through behind her, both of them bypassing the snare by the simple method of flooding it with light. The winged keys were Hermione's. She figured out the logic in under 90 seconds, which was either extraordinary or exactly what you expected from Hermione depending on how well you knew her. The oldest key, the one with the bent wing, she spotted the locking mechanism on the door, assessed the age of the hardware, cross-referenced it with the age of the keys in flight, and had Harry's broom in the air before Ron had finished looking at the ceiling. Harry caught the key in one clean pass. He didn't bother with a chase, he tracked the key's movement pattern for 3 seconds, identified the irregularity in its flight path caused by the bent wing, and put himself in the position it was flying toward rather than the position it was at. The key flew into his hand. Show off, Ron said, not unkindly. The chess set was vast and terrible and Ron's eyes went bright with something that was unmistakably recognition. This is the thing I'm for, this is what I've been building toward, and Harry stepped back because he understood immediately that this was Ron's, that the strategic gift that Ron carried and had never quite had a canvas big enough for was exactly what this chamber required. I can do this, Ron said. Not a question. I know, Harry said. Ron looked at the board with the absolute, focused calm he only showed when he was doing something he was genuinely exceptional at, and he began to work. He moved pieces with the assurance of someone who can see several moves ahead and has made peace with the cost of the winning position. He played the board toward a conclusion that required him, at the end, to sit in the square that would bring the white queen down. "The queen takes me," he said. "You get through. That's the win." "Ron, Harry." Ron looked at him, and his voice was steady and his eyes were clear. "It's chess. I know what I'm doing. I've played this game my whole life and I know the difference between losing a piece and losing the game." He picked up the knight's horse. "Go beat Voldemort. I'll be fine." The queen hit him clean and hard and he went down, and Harry held himself still against the impulse to stop, against the very specific pain of watching someone he loved take a hit meant to forward his own progress, and then moved. He moved because Ron would not respect anything less. He moved because stopping would be a rejection of what Ron had given. He moved because moving was what the gift was for. He looked back once. Hermione was already at Ron's side, her hands quick and sure. She looked up and met Harry's eyes. "Go," she said. The next chamber was a logic puzzle, 7 bottles, a riddle, fire in both directions. Harry had heard Hermione's voice just past Ron's chamber, saying stay with him, please stay with him, and then silence, and he was alone for the first time since the trapdoor. He read the riddle in 15 seconds and identified the correct bottle in 20. Not because he was especially gifted at logic puzzles, though he was, but because he'd been thinking about this sequence for months and had built it into his mental map of what he might encounter. He drank the smallest bottle, felt the cold move through him from throat to chest, walked into the black flame. He walked out the other side. And stopped. The final chamber was circular, stone, lit by torches, and should have contained the mirror of Ariste. It did contain the mirror of Ariste, which had been moved from the 4th floor room at some point in the past several weeks. Dumbledore's contingency, Harry understood, a last line of defense that made the stone accessible only to someone who wanted to find it but not use it. It also contained Quirrell. Quirrell was standing in front of the mirror with his back to Harry, and the first thing Harry noticed was that he was not performing anything anymore. The nervous stutter was gone. The garlic was gone. The turban was still there, but it sat differently, tilted forward slightly, as if weight was being applied from behind. He was speaking to the mirror in a low, frustrated voice, the voice of someone who has been trying to get an answer from something and cannot make the something cooperate. "I can see myself presenting it," he said, "but my hands are empty. How does this, how do I?" He stopped. The tilted turban shifted, slowly, and Harry understood that something on the back of Quirrell's head had become aware of him before Quirrell himself had. Quirrell turned around. He didn't look like a defense against the dark arts professor anymore. He looked like a man who had been occupied, the specific, worn quality of something that has been used as a vehicle for something else's will for long enough that the original tenant of the body has become thin and translucent. His eyes were still his own, but there was something behind them that watched Harry with a quality that was ancient and cold and entirely focused. "Harry Potter," Quirrell said, in the voice that was his and was also something using his. "I wondered whether Dumbledore's little obstacles would keep you out. It seems they were insufficient." "They were fine obstacles," Harry said. His voice was level. He was scanning the room, cataloging exits, noting the mirror's position and the probable location of the stone, in the mirror, still, not yet retrieved. Sprout's plant was impressive. The chess set was brilliant. "Touching," said the thing wearing Quirrell. "You admire your friend's contributions even now." "Yes," Harry said simply. "Where's Dumbledore?" "Far away." Quirrell began to walk toward him, slow, measuring. "I arranged for him to receive an urgent distraction. He is a great man, but he is susceptible to the persuasion that his presence is needed elsewhere." He tilted his head. "You're not afraid?" "No. You should be." "What I am, what lives through this man, I know what you are," Harry said. "Voldemort. Reduced to using another person's body because your own was destroyed on the night you tried to kill me. Sustained by Horcruxes that I know about and that will be addressed in time." He said it the way you'd give someone a briefing, comprehensive, clean, factual. You're powerful and you're intelligent and you've made genuinely bad choices disguised as strategic ones for long enough that the disguise has become your actual thinking. And you need the stone because without it you're still not quite real. The temperature in the room dropped. Quirrell's face went through something complicated. The thing behind his eyes was processing, recalibrating. Harry could see it happening, the cold intelligence of Voldemort encountering a picture of himself from outside his own framework and not entirely liking the clarity of it. "You know a great deal for a child," the voice said. "I had good teachers," Harry said. "The gods." The word came out with the specific contempt of someone who believes only in power and has encountered a claim of power they haven't yet personally tested. "I have heard of your adoption. I confess it changes my assessment of this situation." A pause. "But gods are not here. You are a child, in a room, alone." "Yes," Harry said. "So." Quirrell raised one hand. The wand in it crackled with dark energy, the specific purple-black of magic that has been refined by intent without conscience, magic that knows what it is and doesn't pretend otherwise. "Let us find out what you are without them." The first curse came fast. Harry stepped aside. Not dramatically, simply moved, with the economical precision of someone who has been trained by a being who could throw lightning and expected the training to be taken seriously. The curse hit the wall behind him and the stone scored a deep, smoking line. He noted the angle. The intent. The quality of the casting. Quirrell cast again, 3 in rapid succession, and Harry moved through them with the fluid ease of someone for whom the physics of threat had been a study subject since childhood, and while he moved he assessed. The casting was powerful, technically sophisticated, drawing on Voldemort's genuine and formidable knowledge. It was also angry, which was a weakness, because anger telescoped focus and focus was what was holding Quirrell's deteriorating body together. Harry stopped moving and stood still. Quirrell stopped casting. They looked at each other across the stone chamber. "You're not fighting back," Quirrell said. "Not yet," Harry said. "I was deciding how." The deciding was done. He raised both hands. What came out was not a spell. It didn't need an incantation or a wand movement or any of the formal apparatus of wizarding magic, because what Harry was reaching for existed at a level underneath that apparatus, the direct, unmediated source that the wizarding tradition's techniques were pointing at without quite touching. He reached for the sun. Not metaphorically. Not symbolically. The physical sun, 93 million miles above the Scottish Highlands, burning at 15 million degrees at its core, the incomprehensible furnace that everything on Earth depended on without ever having to think about it. He reached for it the way you reach for a tap, expecting it to be there, because it always was, because Amaterasu had spent 10 years teaching him that this was his inheritance and that inheritance was not alone. The chamber went white. Not the harsh, clinical white of a light turned on in a dark room. The warm, total white of being inside sunlight, the white that has every color in it, that is the sum of everything the spectrum contains. It came from Harry and it filled the chamber completely and it hit Quirrell like a physical wave. Quirrell screamed. The sound had 2 layers, the high, involuntary cry of a human being in pain, and beneath it something else, something that was not quite sound, a frequency that lived in the register of things that did not want to exist in light and were finding out that they had no say in the matter. Harry walked forward through the white. He reached Quirrell in 3 steps and put both hands on the man's face, because that was where the problem was, not in Quirrell, not really, but in the thing attached to Quirrell, the parasitic will that had taken residence there and was burning now in the contact with sunlight the way dark things burn. The warmth that came from Harry's hands was not painful to Quirrell, it was the warmth of morning, of spring, of the specific cellular assurance of a living thing that the sun was still rising and the world was still sustaining itself. To Voldemort it was annihilation. He could hear it, the voice, the cold voice, shrieking now in the register of something that is losing its purchase on existence. "Fool, step back, you cannot, I am immortal, you're a fragment," Harry said quietly, over the shrieking. "You're the part of a person that was left after the person gave up everything that made him human. You're not immortal." You're just stubborn. He increased the light. Quirrell convulsed. His knees buckled and Harry moved with him, keeping the contact, keeping the warmth concentrated on the place where Voldemort's presence was thickest, the back of his head, behind the turban, where the face was, and he felt the connection between Quirrell and the thing parasiting him fraying, fiber by fiber, the way a rope frays when the tension exceeds the material's tolerance. The turban came undone. Harry had known it would. He'd known what was under it since November when the pieces assembled themselves into a shape that could only mean one thing. He kept his eyes on Quirrell's face and felt rather than saw the face on the back of his head, the noseless, barely there face of something that was neither alive nor dead and was finding both conditions newly complicated. You cannot win, the voice said, and it was thinner now, fraying at the edges like smoke in wind. There are more Horcruxes. Killing this body changes nothing, I know, Harry said. I'm not killing you. I'm removing you from him. A pause in the shrieking. A moment of what might, in a human, have been confusion. You made a man into a vehicle, Harry said. I'm giving him back to himself. He pushed. Not aggressively, insistently. The way sunlight pushes through water, simply by being what it is and moving in the direction light moves. Whatever you are now, you don't belong in a living person. Out. The presence of Voldemort left Quirrell's body like a fever breaking. It happened all at once. One moment the chamber was full of that cold, dark intelligence, and the next it was gone, dispersed into something that had no form and no direction and fled toward the gaps between living things the way cold air flees toward warmth. Harry felt it go through the scar on his forehead, a white-hot line that lasted 3 seconds and then was done, the fragment behind the scar responding to the departure of its larger self with a tremor that passed. Quirrell collapsed. Harry caught him. The man was almost nothing, thin and drained and barely conscious, the specific emptiness of a body that has been lived in by something else for too long. His eyes opened. They were his, entirely his, with no double register, no inventory-taking movement. Just a man, confused and depleted and alive. Am I? Quirrell whispered. You're free, Harry said. You're going to be all right. He wasn't certain that was completely true. Quirrell had done things while occupied, had made choices, had let something in, had been complicit to an extent that he would have to live with and that the wizarding world's justice system would have to assess. But right now, in this moment, the man was free, and that was the most immediately true thing, and Harry said it. He laid Quirrell gently on the stone floor and turned to the mirror of Eriste. The stone was in his pocket. He didn't know when it had arrived there, it had simply appeared during the confrontation, the mirror fulfilling its enchantment with quiet efficiency. He reached into his pocket and closed his hand around it. Small. Warm. The concentrated possibility of extended life and limitless creation. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at the mirror. The mirror showed him, himself, holding the stone. No parents. No Amaterasu or Susanoo. Just him, standing in a stone chamber, with a rock in his hand and a choice to make. He understood what Dumbledore had built. The stone could only be retrieved by someone who wanted to find it but not use it. He had found it. He had no intention of using it. Which meant he could also, give it back. Or forward. Or destroy it, if that was the right shape for the solution, though that decision probably wasn't his alone to make. He put it back in his pocket and went to look for Dumbledore. Dumbledore arrived 8 minutes later, which told Harry that the headmaster had realized the distraction was a fabrication some time ago and had been watching the situation develop before intervening. Harry was sitting on the floor next to the unconscious Quirrell when the blue light of Dumbledore's presence filled the entrance to the chamber. The old man looked at the chamber. At Quirrell. At the mirror. At Harry. The stone, he said. Harry handed it to him. Dumbledore took it and held it, and the blue brightness of his presence went very still for a moment, the stillness of someone receiving information they had expected and still finding the reality of it affecting. Then he looked at Harry with an expression that was not the managed warmth, not the careful calculation of their previous meetings, but something much simpler and older. Something like gratitude that had been stripped down to its bones. Quirrell needs the hospital wing, Harry said. He does. He was a victim as much as a perpetrator, Harry said. I don't know what that means legally. But factually. I know, Dumbledore said, and his voice was quiet. I know, Harry. Harry stood up. He was not tired, exactly, the expenditure of what he'd done had not depleted him the way physical exertion depleted him. It had used something, but the something was not a fixed resource, it was more like a capacity that was exercised rather than spent. He felt clean. Clear. The way the air feels after a storm has moved through. Voldemort is gone from Quirrell, he said. Dispersed. He's not gone, there are other Horcruxes, he'll find another way back eventually. But he doesn't have the stone and he doesn't have a body. That will delay him significantly, Dumbledore said. Yes, Harry agreed. Delay. Not stop. He looked at Dumbledore. I want to be part of stopping it properly. When the time comes. I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling you my intention so you can plan with accurate information. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. In the torchlight the old man's face was very clearly old, not the theatrical silver-bearded oldness of his public presence but the real kind, the kind that accumulates from actually living through difficult things, one after another, for a very long time. I had a different Harry Potter planned, he said. I've mentioned that. You have. I find the Harry Potter I actually have considerably more, he paused. The smallest smile moved across his face. More than I planned for. In every direction. Is that all right? Harry asked. It is, Dumbledore said, considerably better than all right. The hospital wing held Harry for 3 days, which he found excessive given that there was nothing physically wrong with him, but Madame Pomfrey had a way of framing medical authority that made arguing feel both futile and vaguely disrespectful, so he stayed and read and wrote letters and accepted the visitors that arrived in a steady stream. Ron arrived on the second day, walking carefully with the bruised ribs that the White Queen had gifted him, which he carried with the slightly theatrical stoicism of someone who is actually fine but sees no reason to downplay a genuine accomplishment. I heard you glowed, he said. I did glow, Harry confirmed. Wicked. He sat down. Hermione cried. She's here right now, Harry said, nodding at the chair on the other side of the bed where Hermione was sitting with a book. I did not cry, she said, without looking up. I was dusty. You were emotional, Ron said. I was affected by the situation, she said. Which is different from, she cried, Ron said to Harry. I heard, Harry said. Hermione finally looked up. Her expression was the one she wore when she was going to say something honest that she'd been preparing for a while. I was scared for you, she said. That's not weakness, that's just, having someone worth being scared for. She said it with the directness she always used for difficult truths, looking him straight in the eye. Don't make a habit of going into things alone. I wasn't alone, Harry said. I never was. She held his gaze for a moment. Nodded once. Went back to her book. Ron helped himself to a chocolate frog from the pile on Harry's bedside table and ate it in companionable silence. Neville came on the third day and stood in the doorway for a moment before coming in, as if testing whether he was wanted. Harry waved him over. He sat, and they talked about his plants for 20 minutes, and when he left the expression on his face was the expression of someone who has understood something important about the difference between being tolerated and being valued. McGonagall visited, briefly, in the professional capacity of head of house with a secondary function that was not professional at all, the specific visit of someone who was genuinely glad a student was alive and was framing this as an administrative check-in to keep the emotional dimension at a manageable scale. She told him he'd won Gryffindor an enormous number of points, that this information was to go no further, and that she expected him in class on Monday. At the door she paused. The modifications you made to Sprout's snare, she said. The calming technique. She'd like you to explain it, when you're ready. Of course, Harry said. She also described it as the most sophisticated plant communication she's seen a student perform in 30 years. McGonagall's expression said she found this information relevant without being entirely sure how to categorize it. Good night, Potter. The letter from Amaterasu arrived on the second evening. He read it in the quiet after Madame Pomfrey had turned the lights down, the parchment catching the ambient glow he couldn't entirely suppress when he wasn't actively managing it. Amaterasu's writing was precise and elegant and carried in its physical form something of the quality of the person who wrote it, the warmth and clarity combination that was entirely hers. We watched, she wrote. We were watching the whole time. Susanoo was at the edge of the sky over Scotland before you reached the third floor, and I was making an argument about why intervention would insult everything we'd built, and he was making an argument about speed, and we were both correct and we both stayed. Because you did not need us. Not because you were not in danger, you were, real danger, the kind that kills people, but because you had everything required. You knew what to do and you did it clearly and you were never afraid. A pause that existed in the spacing between paragraphs. Your mother would have known exactly what to do in that room. She would have found a way through it using exactly the tools available to her, the intelligence and the courage and the specific love that refuses to be frightened into smallness. You are very much her child. You are very much ours. You are very much yourself. Susanoo says, brilliant work, don't do it alone again, I'm coming to get you at the end of term and we're going to do something loud to celebrate. Don't argue. I love you. Rest. Harry set the letter down and looked at the ceiling of the hospital wing, which was high and stone-vaulted and very old, and let himself be, for a few minutes, simply what he was, tired in the good way, the way that means you used yourself fully and the using was right. Safe in the specific way that comes not from the absence of danger but from the knowledge that you moved through danger and came out the other side intact. He slept. The welcoming, or rather farewell, feast at the end of term had the quality of all good endings, generous, slightly chaotic, full of the specific warmth of people who have been through a year together and know they'll be different when they meet again. Gryffindor won the House Cup, which Dumbledore announced with a sequence of last-minute points that managed to be simultaneously generous and precisely calculated, because Dumbledore did nothing that was not precisely calculated. Harry received 60 points that made the common room erupt. Hermione 50. Ron 50. Neville, unexpectedly, 10 points that were announced last and that pushed Gryffindor over Slytherin's total, and the look on Neville's face when his name was called was one of the best things Harry had seen all year. He sat at the feast between Ron and Hermione and across from Neville and ate the extraordinary food and listened to the castle, which had shifted into its end-of-year quality, the distinct hum of a place that has held a year of human living and is settling into the memory of it. He thought about everything the year had been and found that the inventory of it, taken all at once, was enormous. Richer than he'd expected. Fuller. He had a team. He had friends who would lie to professors for him and take hits from chess pieces and stand in doorways with their arms out because they thought something was wrong. He had 2 teachers who respected him honestly, McGonagall, who had moved him immediately to where he'd be challenged, and Snape, who had protected him from above a Quidditch pitch without being asked and without attribution. He had enemies, or the beginnings of them, Voldemort scattered and dispersed and planning his return, and the distant figure of a system that would always prefer him manageable over what he actually was. He had, in the bed next to Ron on the last night before the train, a conversation that started as idle talk and turned into something else. What do you think happens next year? Ron said to the ceiling. Voldemort tries again, Harry said. Different method. He's patient and he's intelligent and he's got resources we don't fully know about. But he doesn't have the stone and he doesn't have a body, so he'll need time. And Dumbledore? Harry thought about Dumbledore. About the man who had planned one thing and gotten another and had chosen, in the end, to revise his planning rather than resent the revision. He's an ally, Harry said. A complicated one. But real. And us? Harry turned his head to look at Ron. Ron was staring at the ceiling with the expression he wore when he was thinking carefully about something, the chess face, the looking ahead several moves face. Us? Harry said. You know what I mean. Harry was quiet for a moment. He thought about the train coming north and Ron introducing himself with a sandwich and Hermione arriving looking for a toad and a year of corridors and classes and arguments and a chessboard that Ron had moved across like a master and a chamber full of white light. We're the part that Voldemort can't plan for, Harry said. He understands power and he understands ambition and he understands fear. He doesn't understand this. He meant them. The three of them, and by extension Neville and the others, and the specific thing that happened when people chose each other without requiring the choice to be strategic. Ron nodded at the ceiling. Good, he said. That's good. They were quiet. The castle hummed. In the dormitory around them the other first-years slept and breathed and turned over in their dreams, full of a year's worth of extraordinary living. Harry looked at the stone ceiling one more time. Somewhere over Scotland, he knew, the sky was very large and very full of stars, and in Japan the sun was already rising, and both of those things were his, and he was there, and nothing that Voldemort planned or schemed or required of the world could change any of that. He slept. Chapter 6, Between Two Skies. The Hogwarts Express left at 11 and Harry was on it early. Not because he needed to be, the train didn't care when you boarded, but because he liked the platform in the 20 minutes before it got loud, when it was still mostly empty and the engine was breathing steam into the morning air and the whole length of the train sat there with the patient, enormous energy of something that was about to go somewhere important. He found their usual compartment, stowed his trunk, settled Kaze's cage on the rack, and sat by the window with a cup of tea he'd acquired from a trolley which he was setting up and had handed it over with the automatic generosity of someone who sees a child sitting quietly and responds to it. He watched the platform fill. Families arriving in overlapping waves. The Hogwarts Express departure had a specific social texture that he'd learned to read over the course of the year, the mixture of children eager to leave and children suddenly aware they were leaving, parents performing cheerfulness over something more complicated, older students moving through the crowd with the easy authority of people who have done this before. He watched a small girl, second year, he thought, Hufflepuff, running back across the platform to hug her mother a second time, and her mother caught her and held on with a fierceness that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. Ron arrived with his entire family, which arrived the way the Weasley family arrived everywhere, loudly, in layers, with a great deal of lateral conversation happening simultaneously. Mrs. Weasley was directing trunk logistics while conducting 3 separate goodbyes and somehow doing both at full capacity. The twins were doing something that produced small colored sparks and that Ron was very deliberately not looking at. Ginny, Ron's youngest sister and the only one Harry hadn't properly met, was standing slightly apart from the cluster with the specific expression of someone who is not yet old enough to be on the train and finds this deeply unjust. She caught Harry watching and stared back with the direct, evaluating gaze of a 10-year-old who has grown up with 6 older brothers and consequently has no social anxiety whatsoever. Harry nodded at her. She went slightly pink and looked away, which he filed as interesting but not requiring action. Ron landed in the compartment with his usual unannounced energy, dropping onto the seat across from Harry and immediately stealing a biscuit from the packet Harry had bought. "You were here early," he said. "I like the platform before it gets busy." "That's very you." Ron ate the biscuit. "My mum wants to meet you. At the other end." "I know. She wrote." Ron stared at him. "She wrote to you?" "Last week. She invited me to visit before I go back to Japan." She didn't tell me he stopped. "Are you going to?" Harry had been thinking about this since the letter arrived, sitting with it the way Amaterasu had taught him to sit with decisions that required honest assessment rather than quick response. He thought about the Weasley jumper folded in his trunk, deep blue and hand-knitted, the card signed by everyone. He thought about what Amaterasu had said on the bench in Diagon Alley, "Let them matter." "Yes," he said. "If that's all right with you." Ron gave him the expression that meant he was trying to appear casual about something he actually cared about quite a lot. It's fine, he said. Obviously. It's fine. He reached for another biscuit. The burrow's brilliant, actually. It's mad but it's brilliant. I know. You know. Your family sounds brilliant, Harry said simply. From everything you've told me. Ron looked at him with that direct, uncomplicated attention. Then he looked at his biscuit. Yeah, he said. They are. Something in his voice was very honest. You're going to like it. Hermione arrived 17 minutes before departure with her parents, who came as far as the barrier and stopped there, a man and a woman with the particular quality of people who have understood that their child has moved into a world they cannot follow her into and have made their peace with this, or are in the process of making it. Harry could see where Hermione came from in both of them. The father had her specific way of paying attention, the mother had her precision. Hermione hugged them both with the same thoroughness she brought to everything, and then she was on the train and her parents were standing on the other side of the barrier and the world had divided itself back into its two halves. She came into the compartment, sat down, and opened a book, and Harry and Ron let this stand without comment because they both understood that Hermione processed transition by doing something purposeful immediately. After about 4 minutes she put the book down and the transition was complete. How are your parents? Harry asked. Good, she said, in the tone that meant complicated but essentially fine. My mother's concerned about the amount of reading I'm apparently doing. My father's delighted. She paused. They asked about you both. What did you say? Ron said. I said you were exactly what I expected and nothing I expected simultaneously. She looked at them. They said that sounded like a good thing. Is it? Ron said. Yes, Hermione said. The train moved. The journey south had a different quality to the journey north, 9 months of accumulated weight in a way that the bright September run didn't have yet. Harry sat by the window and watched Scotland give way to England and ate sweets from the trolley and played Exploding Snap with Ron and lost spectacularly, which he suspected Ron arranged somehow but couldn't prove. Hermione read and occasionally made sharp comments about the game without looking up, which was a skill Harry admired. Neville came by at midday. He stood in the doorway with the now familiar Neville at the door posture, more confident than the version Harry had met in September, but still Neville, still carrying the particular quality of someone who has learned that welcome is possible without having yet fully absorbed it as a baseline expectation. I just wanted to, he started. Sit down, Neville, Harry said. He sat down. They talked for an hour and a half, the four of them, about everything and nothing in the specific way of people who have finished something together and are in the liminal space between the end and whatever comes next. At some point the conversation turned to second year, to what they were expecting, to whether defense would be any better with a new teacher and whether Sprout was going to make Neville's herbology work official in some capacity that recognized what it actually was rather than what the standard curriculum expected. She said she'd write to my gran, Neville said, with the cautious hopefulness of someone who has had enough disappointment to be careful about hope. About putting me in an advanced practical group. Good, Harry said. You should be. I'm not sure I'm, Neville, Harry said. You stood in the portrait hole and stopped the three of us from leaving because you thought we were going to do something stupid. You were going to do something dangerous. That too. My point is you did that. He looked at him. That took more than whatever your gran thinks you lack. Neville looked at him for a long moment with the expression of someone receiving information they want to believe and are in the process of deciding whether to. Then he nodded, once, in the way that meant the decision had been made. At mid-afternoon, Draco Malfoy appeared in the corridor outside the compartment. He didn't come in. He stood in the glass-paned door and looked at the four of them, the specific look of someone who is mapping a world they're not sure they have entry to, and Harry met his eyes and tilted his head slightly toward the space beside Neville. Malfoy looked at the space. Looked at Harry. His jaw moved once and then he opened the door and sat down, and the compartment absorbed this development without drama because Harry had made it clear by his own manner that drama was not the required response. It was not comfortable. There were too many currents for it to be comfortable: Hermione's academic wariness, Ron's instinctive friction, the memory of a year's worth of Malfoy being Malfoy in corridors and classrooms. But it was honest, and honesty in a small moving space has a way of doing more than comfort can. "What are you doing over summer?" Malfoy asked, with the stilted attempt at casual that meant he was trying something he hadn't tried before. "Japan," Harry said. "Then Weasley's." Malfoy glanced at Ron. Ron did not help him. "And then school," Malfoy said. "And then school," Harry agreed. A pause. "My father wants to meet you," Malfoy said. He said it in a way that conveyed, very precisely, that he was not entirely sure whether to pass this information along or not, and had decided that honesty was more useful than strategy. "I'm telling you because I thought you should know. I'm not setting anything up. I just thought you should know it's coming." Harry looked at him. Lucius Malfoy, a name in the wizarding world that carried specific weight, a man who had moved through the last war on the profitable side of several lines and had ended up on the correct side of the surviving power structure by a combination of careful timing and expensive lawyers. A man whose framework was visible in his son in every constructed confidence, every habitual social maneuver. "Thank you," Harry said. "I appreciate the warning." Malfoy nodded. Something in the set of his shoulders was different, the specific difference of someone who has done a small brave thing and found it not as costly as they expected. He stayed for 20 minutes and left without incident, and the compartment let out a collective breath that nobody acknowledged. Ron looked at Harry. "You know he's going to be complicated for years," he said. "Most interesting things are." "Is he interesting?" Harry thought about the boy in Madame Malkin's, the calculated social approach, the genuine uncertainty underneath, the April morning at the Gryffindor table. "Yes," he said. "Susanoo or Amaterasu?" Ron asked. This had become their shorthand for approach, Susanoo meaning direct, forward, trusting collision to resolve things, Amaterasu meaning long patience, letting things develop on their own time. "Amaterasu," Harry said. Hermione made a sound that was not quite disagreement and not quite agreement and meant she was filing this away for later discussion. King's Cross arrived mid-afternoon, the platform filling with the controlled chaos of the express pulling in and 200 students and approximately 400 pieces of luggage going in multiple directions at once. Harry stepped off the train into the noise and let himself stand still for a moment, the way you stand when you want to take an impression rather than a photograph, feeling the whole thing rather than recording a piece of it. The smell of engine steam and city. The sound of families reconnecting. The specific energy of an ending that was also, structurally, a beginning. Molly Weasley found him before he found her, which was not surprising because Molly Weasley operated at a spatial awareness that defied the crowd density. She was broad and warm and had the look of someone who had been sending children off to Hogwarts for years and had not yet found a way to make the reunion quiet. "Harry," she said, and before Harry had entirely processed the approach she had pulled him into a hug with the comprehensive, non-negotiable warmth of a person for whom physical affection was simply the appropriate response to someone's existence. Harry had been held carefully by Amaterasu, who hugged with the precise warmth of someone who does not do things casually. He had been grabbed by Susanoo, who hugged with the energy of a weather event. He had not, before this moment, been hugged by Molly Weasley, which was a third and completely distinct category. He stood in it for a moment and let it happen, and what he felt was simple and uncomplicated and did not require analysis, just warmth, human warmth, the specific kind that comes from a person who loves freely and without conditions and wants nothing from you except your well-being. "You'll come to us," she said, pulling back and looking at him with bright brown eyes that were doing a rapid assessment that was also completely affectionate. "Before you go to Japan. Arthur would love to meet you and the boys have been talking about you all year." "I'd like that very much," Harry said, and meant it. From somewhere in the crowd behind her, the twins, Fred and George, indistinguishable except for something in the specific quality of their attention, were watching him with expressions of delighted evaluation. Fred, or George, pointed at him, then at himself, then back, which Harry interpreted as an interest in future collaborative endeavors and responded to with a nod that made both of them grin. Ron appeared at Harry's shoulder. "They like you," he said. "Be careful. They never like anyone that quickly who they don't want something from." "Good," Harry said. Ron stared at him. "You want the twins to want something from you?" "They're interesting," Harry said. "And whatever they want is probably interesting too." Ron looked briefly pained by this. Hermione said her goodbyes with the efficiency of someone managing emotional content through structural clarity, a hug for Harry that was firm and brief and communicated everything it needed to, a longer moment with Ron that involved some kind of argument about a book they'd both read on the train that Harry suspected was really about something else entirely, and then she was gone into the crowd with her parents, looking back once over her shoulder with the expression she wore when she was memorizing something for future reference. Harry watched her go and felt, clearly, the weight of what the year had built. Not with sadness, with gratitude, the clean, specific kind. She was one of the best things in his life. He would tell her this at some point, probably while she was in the middle of reading something important, which was how he delivered most honest things to Hermione because catching her mid-focus meant she received the information cleanly without the machinery of her social calibration interfering with it. He had 20 minutes before Susanoo arrived, and he spent them on a bench outside the station. London moved around him with its enormous, indifferent energy, cabs and buses and the specific kind of foot traffic that happens in a city that has been too busy to notice itself for several centuries. Harry sat in the middle of it and thought. Not about anything specific at first. Just the aggregate of the year, turning it over the way you turn over something you want to understand fully before you put it down. The sorting. The first classes. Hermione in the destroyed bathroom and Ron moving chess pieces with the particular calm of someone who has found the thing they're for. Quirrell's eyes in the corridor and the feeling behind his scar like a compass needle swinging. The mirror, and his parents, and the way he'd stood up and left without the mirror following him. The white light in the stone chamber. Dumbledore on the floor beside him saying considerably better than all right. He thought about Neville standing in the portrait hole with his arms out. He thought about Draco Malfoy on the train, choosing honesty over strategy. He thought about what he was going to second year and what second year would probably try to be to him, another test, another layer of the same question that the wizarding world kept asking, which was, who are you and what are you for and will you be what we need you to be? He already knew his answer. He'd known it since he was old enough to understand the question. He was Harry Potter, and he was the son of Lily and James, and he was the child of Amaterasu and Susanoo, and he was a wizard and a divine being and a seeker and a Gryffindor and Ron's best friend and Hermione's sparring partner and Neville's unexpected champion, and he was 11 years old and he was not afraid of a single thing that was coming. "You're very loud when you're thinking," said a voice. Harry looked up. Susanoo was sitting beside him on the bench. He was in what he called his London clothes, dark jeans, a jacket that looked like it had been through several severe weather events and had the relationship with this that most things had with Susanoo, which was to say it had decided to cooperate rather than complain, and his hair was tied back, and he was eating something from a paper bag with the unfocused satisfaction of someone who has been looking forward to a specific food for a while. "You were there the whole time," Harry said. "About 5 minutes." Susanoo held out the paper bag. Harry looked inside. Takoyaki, somehow still hot. "I was watching the people." "Find anything interesting?" "Mortals are always interesting," Susanoo said, and his voice had the specific quality it got sometimes when he said things like this, not dismissive, not superior, but affectionate in the comprehensive way of someone who has watched humans for 10,000 years and still finds them genuinely remarkable. "You, though." He looked at Harry with the storm-gray eyes and the full, direct attention. "You look different." "Good different?" "Older," Susanoo said. "Not older than 11, you're exactly 11, your face is exactly 11, you have a piece of eel sauce on your chin," Harry wiped it. "But the thing behind your eyes. That's older. That's been somewhere." "I have been somewhere," Harry said. "Tell me." Harry told him. Not in the organized report style of his letters to Amaterasu, those were constructed, deliberate, shaped for understanding. This was different. This was the Susanoo version, which was more like talking while walking, not linear, not formal, just the actual texture of the year as it had actually been, in the order things came to mind. The troll and Ron's chess and the mirror and quarrel and the light in the chamber and the way the darkness left a person when you pushed it with everything you had and refused to stop. Susanoo listened without interrupting, which was one of the things Harry appreciated about him. People underestimated Susanoo's capacity for listening because they saw the energy first, the loudness and the forward momentum, and assumed that was the whole of him. But he had been listening to the world since before the world had language, and when he gave his attention it was complete. When Harry finished, Susanoo was quiet for a moment. Then, the fragment in your scar responded to Voldemort leaving Quirrell. Yes. It passed through me. How was that? 3 seconds of, Harry found the word. Contact. Like having a conversation with something that has no language anymore. Just sensation. Cold, mostly. And then it was gone. Susanoo nodded. His jaw was doing something, Harry noticed, the specific jaw thing he did when he was angry and had decided not to act on it immediately. The directed, compressed anger of someone who is choosing precision over expression. He put that in you, Susanoo said. When you were a baby. That cold thing. He put a piece of himself in you without asking. I know. He stopped. Ate a piece of takoyaki. I have strong feelings about that which I've been managing for about 10 years. I know, Harry said again. The Horcruxes. Susanoo's voice was measured in the way that meant the measuring was costing him something. There are others. We know where most of them are. Amaterasu has been, he paused. She's been tracking them. Quietly. Preparing information. He glanced at Harry. Not intervening. We agreed not to intervene unless you were in danger you couldn't handle. But the information is there, when you need it. Harry looked at him. How long has she been tracking them? Since we found you, Susanoo said. The night in the cupboard. She touched your scar and understood the shape of what had been done, and she started then. He met Harry's eyes. She was making sure that when the time came you'd have everything you needed. Harry sat with that for a moment. 10 years. 10 years of Amaterasu, whose patience was older than human civilization, moving quietly through the architecture of Voldemort's darkest work and building a map of it so that when her child needed the map it would be complete. She didn't tell me, he said. She thought you had enough to carry. She was wrong about that. Susanoo looked at him. Tell her that, he said. She'll disagree, but tell her anyway. She respects being disagreed with honestly. A pause. She respects everything you do honestly. Harry nodded. He would. The Horcrux in your scar, Harry said. That's still there. Yes. That has to be addressed. Yes. Do you know how? Susanoo was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone who doesn't know, the quiet of someone who knows and is deciding how to frame it. There is a way, he said. It requires time and preparation and a willingness to go somewhere that is not entirely the living world. Amaterasu and I have discussed it. It is possible. When you're ready. Harry thought about that. The fragment of Voldemort's soul sitting behind his scar, the thing that had been there since he was a year old, the cold passenger he'd never known was there until Amaterasu told him at 7. The thing that connected him to Voldemort through some channel he didn't fully understand yet. Not yet, he said. No, Susanoo agreed. Not yet. But soon. Second year, Harry said. Something's coming in second year. I don't know what yet. Voldemort doesn't rest, Susanoo said. Not with fear, with the flat accuracy of someone describing weather patterns. He will find another approach. He is patient and he is intelligent and he has been making the same core mistake for 40 years, which is the mistake of thinking power is the same as being right, but he will find another approach. And we'll be ready, Harry said. Susanoo looked at him for a moment. Then the grin came, the full, unmanaged, takes over his whole face grin that made the air pressure drop in sympathy, and he stood up from the bench and held out one hand. Come on, he said. Your mother's been up since 4 in the morning pretending she's been working normally and not watching the arrival times on the Muggle train system, and if we're not back in the next hour she's going to come to London herself and nobody wants the goddess of the sun standing outside King's Cross station in July. Harry took his hand and stood up. What are we doing to celebrate, he said. I was thinking storm, Susanoo said, with the specific thoughtfulness of a man describing a meal he's been planning for a while. Good Pacific storm. The right scale. Safe but impressive. He started walking. Unless you want to add the solar component, in which case we can do something properly theatrical. Define theatrical. Aurora over Japan. Very intense. Probably visible from most of East Asia. Amaterasu will say it's excessive. It is excessive, Susanoo said cheerfully. That's the point. You survived your first year at school and destroyed a piece of Voldemort and made real friends and learned things and you're 11 years old and you're extraordinary. Excessive is the appropriate response. Harry walked beside him through the London crowd, which moved around them without comment, because London was a city that had made its peace with unusual things as long as they kept moving in the right direction. The afternoon was warm and full of city noise and the sky above was the blunt, committed blue of an English summer day. All right, Harry said. Aurora. Susanoo's grin, beside him, was the approximate intensity of a small sun. They walked. Japan was the same and Harry was different and the combination of these two things was its own specific joy. The shrine in the evening light was long cedar shadows and gravel paths and the smell of incense and something cooking in the main hall, which meant Amaterasu had been cooking since she knew they were arriving, which meant she had known for hours, which meant she had been tracking their position through the ambient awareness that was simply how she operated in the world. Harry walked through the gate, past the stone foxes, along the gravel path, and through the main hall doors. She was at the fire. She turned when he came in. They looked at each other. The year was between them, not as a gap, not as a loss, but as a substance, something they had both been inside and would always have in common. Harry felt it, the year of mornings without her, of working through things on his own, of discovering that her voice was inside him in a way that didn't require her physical presence to be heard. And he saw it in her, the thing she kept behind the serenity, the feeling she had taken his leave with and kept close for 9 months while he was on the other side of the world growing into more of himself. He crossed the room and she met him halfway, and this time the hug was the Amaterasu version, precise and total, the warmth without source quality turned all the way up, the specific embrace of someone who has been a god longer than the island of Japan has existed and whose love, when she pointed it at you, was the exact temperature of everything growing toward light. He held on. You're taller, she said, into his hair. By about 3 centimeters, he confirmed. I noticed in your last letter. The handwriting changed. Does handwriting change when you grow? Yours does. She pulled back and looked at him with those amber eyes, reading him the way she read everything, completely, cleanly, not missing what was there. You did well. I did what the situation needed, he said. Which is what you taught me. You did more than that. She held his face in both hands for a moment, the way she had in the cupboard in Surrey 11 years ago, the first gesture of claim. Tell me everything. I told Susanoo on the way. Susanoo's account of events will prioritize the dramatic moments and compress the texture. Tell me everything. From outside, Susanoo's voice carried through the walls, I can hear you. My accounts are comprehensive. They are thrilling, Amaterasu said, loud enough to carry. Comprehensive is different. A sound from outside that was either thunder or Susanoo expressing an opinion. Harry sat down by the fire and began to talk. He stayed up until very late, and the conversation moved through everything: the year, the stone, Quirrell and Voldemort, Dumbledore and his revising plans, Ron and Hermione and Neville, Malfoy on the train, the mirror and his parents and the way he'd looked at it and understood the difference between wanting and needing. When he got to the parents' part, Amaterasu was quiet for a long time. The fire moved. "You spoke to them," she said. "In the mirror." "I thanked them," he said. "I don't know if that means anything. Mirrors don't transmit." But it needed saying. "It means something," she said, with the certainty of someone who understands the mechanics of this better than most. "The mirror shows the heart's desire. Speaking into it is speaking into what you most truly want. That has resonance." "I want them to know I'm all right," Harry said. "I want them to know that what they did, the night they died, wasn't wasted. That I'm using the life well." "Tell me something," Amaterasu said. "Do you think they would recognize you? If they could see you now?" Harry thought about it. James Potter in the mirror, grinning with his whole face. Lily with his eyes and the specific quality of courage that costs something and doesn't let you stop because of the cost. Would they recognize the person their son had become, trained by gods, shaped by a shrine, standing in the chamber with the white light coming out of him? "My father would think it was brilliant," Harry said. "He'd want details on the light thing and he'd try it himself and probably set something on fire." Amaterasu almost smiled. "And your mother?" Harry was quiet for a moment. "She'd recognize the intent," he said. "Not the form, she wouldn't know what the sun energy was, she'd never seen it. But she'd know why I used it. She'd know it wasn't about power. It was about removing the wrong thing from a person, because the wrong thing had no right to be there." He paused. "She'd approve of the reasoning." "Yes," Amaterasu said. "She would." They sat for a while longer, and then she said, "The Horcrux information. You're upset that I didn't tell you earlier." "Not upset," Harry said. "I think I should have had it." She nodded. Not a concession to being wrong, more a recognition of a difference in how they each understood the same situation. "I thought carrying the map of his darkness while you were also carrying a piece of it was too much weight," she said. "I made a judgment about what you could hold." "I can hold more than you think," he said. "I know," she said. "You proved that this year." A pause. "I'll give you the full account. Everything we've tracked. You can assess it yourself." "Thank you." "And you're right," she said, which was 3 words that Amaterasu used precisely because she used them only when she meant them precisely. "I should have trusted you with it sooner." Harry nodded. The fire shifted. The incense moved through the hall in its slow, ceremonial drift. Outside, somewhere in the cedars, Susanoo was doing something with the weather. Harry could feel it, the gathering pressure of a man who had been mostly well-behaved for 9 months and was enjoying the relief of being fully himself in a space that could accommodate him. "He's starting the storm," Harry said. "He's been composing it since noon," Amaterasu said. "He gets sentimental and he doesn't have a better outlet." "Is that what that is?" "He missed you," she said. "Don't tell him I told you. He'll deny it at significant volume." Harry looked at the fire. Looked at Amaterasu. Looked around the main hall, the cedar beams, the stone floor, the paper screens letting in the blue dark of early night outside, the altar with its permanent lamp and the shadows that were old when history was young. His home. The place that had made him. The place that would always be the north point of his compass regardless of where else he stood. "Next year," he said. "Second year. What do you think?" "I think Voldemort will try something more subtle," she said. "He understands now that direct approaches are insufficient. He will work through someone more carefully. He will use the wizarding world's own structures against itself." "And Dumbledore?" "Dumbledore will have updated his understanding of you after this year. He will be a more honest ally. Perhaps not a simpler one, he is constitutionally incapable of simplicity, but more honest." "And me?" She looked at him. The amber eyes warm and direct and reading him with the completeness of a being who has known him since before he had a language to describe himself in. You will grow, she said. You will make mistakes, smaller than you think, larger than you'd like. You will have difficult conversations and make hard decisions, and there will be moments when you doubt yourself, not your power but your judgment, and that's right, that's the sign of someone who's thinking carefully. She paused. And you will be fine. Specifically, precisely fine. Not because nothing bad will happen but because you are the person who will handle what happens. You always were. Outside, the storm broke. It came in fast and total, the way Susanoo's storms always came, the specific quality of something that means exactly what it is, no subtlety, no hedging, just the full and complete expression of everything weather can be. Lightning lit the shrine complex in brilliant, crackling white. Thunder came rolling down from the hills like something vast turning over in its sleep. Rain hit the roof of the main hall in a sustained roar. Harry stood up and walked to the doors and pushed them open. The storm was extraordinary. The cedars were moving, their old shapes bending and recovering in the gust, and the lightning was coming fast and clean, and the air tasted like ozone and electricity and the deep, particular smell of rain on old stone. In the middle of the courtyard, standing in the middle of it all with his arms slightly out and his hair completely undone and his whole face turned up to the sky with the expression of something that is very thoroughly at home, was Susanoo. He saw Harry in the doorway and the grin came, weather-wide, storm-bright. There he is, he shouted over the thunder. Harry walked out into the rain. He didn't run, just walked, steadily, out into the courtyard, and the storm closed around him the way storms closed around him, which was differently than they closed around other people, which was to say they made room. Not because he commanded it, because he was part of it, because the current that ran in him was the same current that ran in the lightning and the rain recognized its own. He stood in the storm and he held up one hand and called the sun. It came the way it always came, steady, total, the warmth that had every color in it. In the middle of a rainstorm at 10 o'clock at night, standing in a Shinto shrine in Japan, Harry Potter held the sun in one hand and the storm crackled around him and the rain fell through the light and caught it, and the courtyard filled with the specific, unrepeatable phenomenon of a million small raindrops lit from inside. Susanoo laughed. The laugh mixed with the thunder. Behind Harry, Amaterasu appeared in the doorway, and she looked at what they'd made, her light in his hand, Susanoo's storm around his shoulders, the rain turned to light, and the expression on her face was the one she kept very carefully behind the serenity, the one that she never showed unless something required the full truth of her. She was proud. Not the ordinary kind, not the pride of someone whose plan worked out. The deep kind. The kind that is made of love so complete it has moved past needing anything in return and exists simply as itself, pointing at someone who became what they were always going to become. Harry caught her expression over his shoulder and held it for a moment. Then the lightning came, a great forking bolt that split the sky above the shrine into something magnificent, and Harry turned his face up to it and laughed too, 11 years old and divine and human and exactly himself, standing between two skies that were both, entirely and forever, his. The aurora appeared over Japan that night at midnight and was visible, according to the following morning's news reports across East Asia, as far south as Shanghai. Scientists attributed it to unusual solar activity. They were not wrong.